quick. All right. There we go. Finally, I can see you. Hopefully, you guys can see me. What is going on? Oiret, it's good to see you, brother. How are you doing? AC, let's go, man. Finally. Yeah, I'm so happy to be streaming. I really missed it, man. I do like it. You know, it's obviously like a sort of dream job to me. I would love to just get on my mic and talk all the time. Unfortunately, you know, I got work, I've got stuff to do, and it's not always um, easy to stream. I guess you know it's always hard to find the time, but you know what? It's still pretty good. Hello, guys. We are already 3 people, so that's pretty nice. You know, it's good. You know, it's early still, but this is awesome. There's been a lot of stuff happening lately. Obviously, there's always something happening in Ukraine. Turkey just had elections. Mexico itself, it's been dealing with a lot. I don't know if you guys know, but there's like an active volcano really close to Mexico City and other places. So, yeah, we've been dealing with that also. I mean, it's technically still active. So, you know, there's been talks about evacuating the city. It's just really messy, but I think it's gonna be good. You know, just found your channel. Can't believe it got recommended to me from YouTube. Such a great channel. Thank you very much. Chinera. I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly, but thank you so much. I really appreciate the support. I heard about the volcano. Yeah, it's close to you. Yeah, it's close to me. I am in Mexico City, dude. So it's relatively close. We've been seeing a lot of ash lately in the sky. So I don't know if you guys can hear, but it's raining actually. So the weather has been like crazy. There's a lot of ash in the sky, so it's kind of toxic. I can't get my dogs out. I can't really go out overall. It's been getting better. It's not like that. The airport was also pretty crazy, but you know, I just need to get the fuck out, and that's why in a couple of weeks actually, I'm gonna travel outside the country. So that's gonna be really really nice. Oh, sorry, I actually misspelled it. so, um, so a lot of things happening. Like I said, let's go to the screen. There we go. So we've got the Turkish elections. Turkey, relatively recent, re-elected Erdogan. I can't believe that this guy is still president, dude. He's been ruling Turkey for what, 20 years now? I mean, the fact that he's still the president of Turkey is just insane to me. But the people have spoken. Do we have the results? Can we like Google the results? I mean, it was like really close, wasn't it? Maybe it wasn't like that close. It's just still too recent. I don't know where we can find. So we don't have. Do we have results? I mean, I can't see like the because Erdogan won, right? Okay, there we go. So there's the map, right? I can't pronounce the other guy's name. I just can't pronounce it, so I'm just gonna mention him, you know, as the other guy. Uh, but he won a lot of things. He won Istanbul. He won all of the provinces around the coast, which are like really important. And he also won on this part of Turkey, which of course a lot of Kurdish people live here. However, Erdogan really won the heartland, right, of Turkey, and he won 52% of the vote. That is crazy. That's it's a small margin, but it's still 5%. So he won relatively comfortably. If you look at the first results, he was like polling like 49% against the other guys, 44%. ¿Cuánto tiempo, amigo? Muchas gracias, Paul. Un saludo. Muchas gracias por pasarte a saludar, viejo. So I don't know, man. There we go. Current president, 20 years in power, was prime minister from 2003 to 2014. He was the mayor of Istanbul, right? If you don't know who this guy is, the new president of Turkey. This guy is also fairly interesting. You know, the guy from the Republican People's Party, right? But I don't know, man. I just thought it was a pretty crazy election. I mean, I guess we all sort of knew Erdogan was gonna win, but whatever. Really, it doesn't matter. Turkey's gonna have some problems soon if Erdogan doesn't raise the interest rates. I know the thing about their economic policy is very strange. Normally, and I'm not an economist, but I do like a lot of these topics. And it's just normally when inflation is that high, you fight it with high interest rates. However, the Erdogan government just hasn't do it. It's almost like they pretend inflation doesn't exist. It's very strange. And Turkey has like one of the highest inflations in the world. I mean, it's like what, 70%? It's like 46%, which is like incredibly high, dude. In the United States, inflation is like 6%. Also, right now in Mexico, it's like 6%. And like, you can see prices increasing every, few months, right? They will add a peso or a few cents. But imagine just having 46%, dude, every single year. It's crazy. It was seen declining to 28% by the end of 2024. I don't know what this article is talking. Uh, these are just like predictions, right? Reuters, yeah. So the predictions at the end of 2023 are going to be 46%. Hello, hello. We should also see Hoster's video and have. Oh yeah, that's true, dude. I think I haven't been very active on YouTube, so thank God I have like a bunch of videos that I haven't watched. That's definitely one that we'll watch. So it's just so sad to see Turkey in this situation. At one point there was big talks about Turkey, and Turkey. I think it's still a candidate when it comes to joining the European Union and joining. Of course, they have that desire, but it seems like with Erdogan, they have really moved away from that goal, and it almost feels like they are playing both sides. It almost feels that Turkey is friendly with the West, but they're also kind of friendly with Russia sometimes. So the politics are very strange in Turkey. I don't know. I wish it was different, but it's really not. I guess I'll be able to tell you guys. I'm gonna go to Turkey in a couple of weeks, so I guess I'll be able to tell if it's really crazy or not. So this video on Kraut, it's a couple of weeks old, and it's about the neutrality in Europe after 2022. So I'm guessing this video is gonna have to do a lot with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and how it has affected neutrality. Because a lot of countries have had spoken. International geopolitics have really changed after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now we have Sweden wanting to join NATO. Finland is already a member of NATO, right? So it has changed a lot the dynamics of Europe, especially also now that America is trying to sort of move away from Europe. We see the Americans sort of, staying back, and holding back, and they're not going all the way for Europe. So I think now the Europeans sort of realize that, what, we have to defend ourselves, because if we don't defend ourselves, the Americans might not. So I think that has put a lot of pressure in Europeans, and I think the European people as well have dealt with the effects of this invasion, right? When it comes to gas prices, just the cost of electricity, inflation, right? So we've all suffered tremendously, especially Europeans. So I guess that's where he's gonna start. But I don't know. Kraut has always interesting predictions, so I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm excited about this.
This video is about.
Here in the US, the big story is the debt ceiling. True, that's also a big story. The US debt ceiling. That's. I think that's the one that I am scared about the most. the U.S. debt ceiling. That's also a huge
Neutral
cookie.
countries in Europe. How recent events have impacted neutral countries in Europe, what may be the consequences for them, and what the end of
Oh
Scandinavian
my God, dude!
neutrality
It's been a while since I have seen the last Kraut video. You know, it's been like months, I think. I don't know, dude.
may mean for Europe. Media coverage is one way to get a sense of a country's position on geopolitical
Should we leave the
But it is
sponsor?
important to pay close attention to where the information is coming from. Ground News is an app and website.
About 1 week until another possible global depression. That's a crazy prediction, man. But you know what? I wouldn't be surprised, really. I mean, we had like a little scare a few months ago of like going into another depression. But I think the U.S. debt ceiling is like a huge problem. I don't know how the Republicans
I
and the
used to
Democrats are
verify
gonna
information
figure
with
it out. You
access to
know?
thousands of local and international sources in one place. One topic I'll touch on in this
Yeah,
video
absolutely.
is the potential construction of an
You know,
Irish
that's a good
fixed
idea. You gotta lower the volume a little bit.
Using Ground News, I can certainly
My
say
God.
about Ireland's
What's the
current
latest
I see
news
that
on the
before
U.S. debt ceiling? You know?
Ireland
Uh,
asked the public for their views on the country's tradition of military neutrality. I can see that there are publications.
This actually seems like a nice product.
Ukraine, and of course Ireland, reporting on this story. As you can imagine, the way this is covered by local sources in Ireland could be quite different from how it is reported in Ukraine. With Ground News, I can...
Some bank collapses. 4 big banks this year collapse. Yeah. The First Republic Bank, Silicon Valley, and a couple others, right? It's crazy, right? After Lehman Brothers, you would think people would have learned their lesson. It just doesn't. It doesn't seem like that's the case, you know. Sort of big banks seem to be doing almost the same thing. Of course, this is not with mortgages and the investment vehicles they created on mortgages, but this is just debt, you know, a bunch of debt, business debt, government debt.
Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine regards neutrality. And since Finland joined NATO, I thought I'd take a moment to talk about neutrality in Europe and how it is changing. Sweden and Finland abandoning their neutrality to seek out NATO membership will have an enormous impact on the European political
Wasn't
landscape
Silicon
that should not
Valley
be overlooked.
pretty, I mean, fairly big? I mean, not huge, not like national. Man, you're right, you know, maybe not national level. But I think, I mean, within their states, they were pretty relevant, right? I mean, Silicon Valley Bank was definitely very important in the whole Silicon Valley region.
This war will also have a substantial impact on the remaining neutral countries.
Yeah.
Here's something that many have overlooked throughout the last year. Ukraine officially was a neutral country.
Yeah.
I am sure many of you are surprised by this. It is often, as mentioned before, overlooked. But yes, technically, on paper, Ukraine was neutral. In its 1991 Declaration of Independence, her lawmakers declared their intention to construct a neutral state. And that neutrality was also written into the Ukrainian constitution in 1996.
Yeah, this is going to be, of
as
course, a
part
good
the
point, you
Budapest
know.
Memorandum. As part
If this could happen to Ukraine, which was supposedly neutral, right? This could happen to any European country. And, you know, I don't think... I don't know if Russia is willing to go all the way, really. I don't think they will. So I wouldn't... I wouldn't raise the alarms too early, you know, but...
Part of this agreement,
It's a good
Ukraine
point.
also gave up its Soviet-inherited nuclear weapons and got guarantees on sovereignty from Russia and the United States. Russia violated that agreement in 2014, and Ukraine consequently dropped its
Yeah, they
neutrality.
have been doing
And
this
Ukraine has
since
spent the
Crimea,
years
right?
since trying
It's
to
not
find
just
either
a
a new
later
partnership
invasion.
with the West
They've been doing
or
this for a
get
while.
guarantees from Russia that it will finally respect its sovereignty. And what happened to Ukraine forced the remaining neutral European countries to face a very uncomfortable question. Namely, what good did neutrality do for Ukraine?
Oh, yeah, North Korea is definitely not stopping anytime soon, you know? Thanks, Putin and Bush, yeah. Oh, yes, the new lesson is that if you have nukes, never give them up. Hasn't there been talks with, like, Belarus hosting Russian nukes?
Because a fact
That's
we
not
can
great.
all
That's not a
currently
good
observe
sign
is
at
that
all.
Ukraine's neutrality did not guarantee her peace. The opposite. Ukrainian neutrality made Ukraine more vulnerable. And neutral Europe is also forced to confront
That's an
another
interesting
very
point.
uncomfortable fact. That being that neutrality, ultimately, means that if you are attacked, you will stand alone. Yes, many states are sending military aid to Ukraine, but no soldiers. Ukraine will fight this alone. Ukrainians will have to win this alone. All that states who support Ukraine can do is attempt to alleviate the Ukrainian suffering by sending them weapons superior to Russian weapons, share intelligence on Russia, provide military training and logistics, sheltering Ukrainian refugees, putting pressure onto Russia, and
by the way, I mean, let's not underappreciate all of this help has been very useful to the Ukrainians, right? The armored vehicles, the rocket launchers. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff that has really helped Ukraine. So I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing.
Guaranteeing Ukraine NATO membership after this
Although
war
NATO membership would have been better, obviously.
Confronting this has been especially impactful on Scandinavians. Sweden has spent years now being continuously harassed by the Russians. For almost 20 years, the Russians have been flying nuclear bombers into Swedish airspace,
Oh, really?
simulated nuclear attacks on Stockholm and Gotland, harassed Swedish ships with submarines, violated her territorial waters with nuclear submarines.
They're such
constantly
bullies, the
threatening
Russians.
seas, and tried to interfere in Swedish politics. The Swedes reacted by bolstering their military spending and reintroducing a conscription army. But now, after recent
Sweden
events,
has conscription.
for the Swedes,
Wow.
the prospect of
didn't
standing
know that.
alone in case of Russian aggression was simply no longer tenable. Recent events have had an even greater impact on Finland. If you ever read any history books about the Winter War with...
You know what? This kind of reminds me a little bit of World War One. It sort of feels like everyone wants to be part of an alliance, and all of those alliances are supposed to defend one another. So it just sort of reminds me of that era, where countries were desperately joining one side or the other, even if they didn't necessarily like each other that much, which is the case, for example, with BRICS, right? And Russia and China and India, not necessarily liking each other that much, sort of alliances of convenience. And it sort of reminds me of that era,
First-hand accounts by Finnish veterans, or if you ever interviewed or watched an interview with or talked to a Finnish Winter War veteran, you will have probably heard the following sentence. We had to fight alone. It is almost the unofficial motto of an entire generation of Finland. It is a historic fact that has heavily lingered in the historic consciousness of the Finnish people since the Winter War, and consequently had a substantial impact on shaping the Finnish national character and identity across multiple generations. Finland's neutrality was the result of something called Finlandization. After a set of wars in which the Soviet Union attempted to conquer Finland, Finland was able to retain its
brother,
sovereignty
how's
in
it going,
exchange for
Thomas?
surrendering
It's been going pretty
territory
good.
and becoming neutral for a treaty with the Soviet Union. In accordance with this treaty, if Finnish borders were ever violated by NATO during a war with the Soviet Union, Finland would have to join the war on the side of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, in exchange for not interfering in the internal politics of Finland, would get a say in Finnish defense politics. This, in case you wondered, is also why the Finnish armed forces used to use a lot of Soviet equipment. So the entirety of Finland's neutrality was conditioned on an understanding and partnership with Russia. In other words, Finnish neutrality was based on an agreement that could have only worked
That's
as
what
long
they
as
had
Russia
to
was
do,
deemed
though.
a
Yeah.
trustworthy international partner. And this is important, because it meant that Finland's neutrality, in many ways, was one of the most important diplomatic factors indicating Russia's trustworthiness on the international stage. Meaning, Finnish neutrality was more valuable to Russia than it was to Finland, because it meant that no matter what Russia did, as long as Finland remained neutral, Russia still had a degree of trustworthiness on the international stage.
That is
Finnish
true.
trust in Russia to uphold this agreement was a measure of Russian trustworthiness. You may now understand why Finland breaking with its neutrality has done irreparable damage to Russia in European diplomacy. It now means that Russia has nothing to point at as proof of its trustworthiness. Only
They're
a
the bad
long
guy
record
now.
of behavior
They're the bad guy now, like openly.
that deems it as untrustworthy. As to what the end of Swedish and Finnish neutrality means for European defense and security, well, there are people with background in military analysis who have done far better videos than I ever could. I will direct you towards one channel in particular, Perun, who has a background in defense economics and made 2 long videos on European defense and one specifically on the end of Swedish and Finnish neutrality. Links will be in the description. But in short, it is a complete disaster for Russia. Overall, the current geopolitical situation in Europe is nothing short of a disaster for Russia. Europe now basically stands united, as it has not been since the Napoleonic Wars. And yes, we have to go as far back as the Napoleonic Wars to appreciate how substantial the changes to European security are, since it was then that Sweden became a neutral state. In many ways, the changes to the European political landscape remind me of the end of the First and Second World Wars, and how the ends of these conflicts completely trashed the previous geopolitical European system, commonly known as the Concert of Europe. After the Napoleonic era, the Concert of Europe was a system of power balances created among European states with the intention of preventing major European wars. And a core factor in the Concert of Europe was neutrality. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, and in particular Belgium were all neutral states in the 19th century and early 20th century. And their neutrality was intended to be a core component.
Didn't really
of
work
maintaining
for them that
Europe,
well.
in particular Belgium. Belgium did not choose neutrality. Neutrality was forced on it by the British. The British believed this Belgian neutrality would prevent both France and Germany from dominating Europe. And the neutrality of the Belgian
I've seen
state
Perun's
was a
videos,
form
they are
of
very
neutrality that we
informative,
no
and
longer
he
see
is not
today
one of the
because it is
clickbait.
considered to be a complete political
That's nice.
failure.
Maybe we can watch
a dependent
few videos.
neutrality with foreign guarantors, meaning Belgium did not build a huge army to defend themselves, but would rely on others in case of being invaded. Belgium, if invaded by France, would have the British and Germans to support them, and if Belgium was invaded by Germany, then Britain and
Which was
France
what
would come
happened.
to defend Belgium. Now, this may sound great on paper, but if you know even the most basic minimum about the history of the First and Second World Wars, then you will know that this idea was a complete and
It didn't
utter
work, yeah,
disaster for
exactly.
Belgium, and
It didn't
for
really
Europe at
work.
large. Belgian neutrality was supposed to prevent a large European war, but because it was constructed to entangle others, it did the opposite and acted as a catalyst for a large European war. And in an act of incredible European wisdom, the kind of which you will only find here, it was decided that Belgium should continue this form of neutrality after the First World War. The Second World War also unraveled the weaknesses of neutrality that we touched upon before. The Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, Austria, Yugoslavia, Norway, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and Finland were all neutral countries. And that neutrality did absolutely nothing to protect them from Nazi or Soviet aggression. Turkey, Sweden, and Portugal were also neutral states during this period and watched in horror how useless neutrality was.
Okay. So he's clearly trying to say that neutrality is not good, but is he trying to say that neutrality is never good? You know, it just sounds like, I don't know, I don't want to sound too critical yet, but maybe it sounds like he's going on neutrality a little bit too much.
Invaded. We in fact know today that Nazi Germany was planning to invade Sweden and would have gone through with it if things hadn't started going south for them in 1943.
Yeah.
So at the end of the Second World War, these countries faced the same question that many face watching the war in Ukraine today, namely the question of what good did neutrality do for Ukraine in the end? In 1945, after the war was over, neutral countries in Europe had to ask what good did neutrality do for anyone in Europe, and consequently most of them decided to end neutrality and join NATO. With that comparison, you may now see why I believe that what we are currently seeing can be somewhat compared to the end of the Second World War. In particular, the fate of one country forced many to confront the disadvantages of neutrality: Czechoslovakia. As you all probably know, during the Munich conference, the Nazis were granted the Sudetenlands as the Czechoslovaks were sold out by the British and French. But there's one point in the Munich agreement that many forget. Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I think, maybe you're right. You know, maybe it's his, neutrality to the point of being isolated. I think,
was allied to Britain and France, but as part of the Munich agreement, Czechoslovakia was forced by the Nazis to give up all alliances and become a neutral state. As we know today, this neutrality was never meant to be sincere or respected.
Yeah, of course, one of the moments in history where you could really be very critical about neutrality was the beginnings of World War II, right? All what happened before the war, right? Sorry, after. I mean, what happened to Czechoslovakia? What happened to Poland? What happened to, Austria even? Sort of countries tried to be neutral, and they allowed Nazi aggressions until they couldn't ignore it anymore. That was really what happened. And if you think about it, Russia has been committing aggressions for quite some time now. So should we let them escalate? That's a really good question. That's a really important question because I think a lot of people really seem to forget our history. We seem to forget our past. And this was a very clear moment where neutrality didn't work and let one of the worst humans to ever exist rule Nazi Germany, right? So it's
by
critical.
the Nazis.
Yeah.
The Nazis used this neutrality to neuter the
It would be better if Lukashenko would survive for a bit longer so Russia doesn't install an even more loyal puppet in Belarus. Yeah, that's
remaining
true, though. That's
Czechoslovak
true. Look
state
at the
so
news
they
about
could later
Lukashenko.
invade and annex it. Meaning the Nazis were aware that neutrality meant a country would stand alone and therefore use neutrality as a weapon against their Czech victims. In fact, the Nazis would continue to abuse neutrality throughout the Second World War. Something we often forget about the invasions of Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands is that the Nazis officially justified every single one of them by claiming that they were securing and protecting the neutrality of these countries. This is something worth remembering today when Russia justifies its aggressions towards neighbors by claiming that they are doing so in order to protect their neutrality. But if neutrality is so risky, then
exactly,
you may ask, why even do neutrality in the first place? Well, it's not just geopolitics. It also has a lot to do with internal development. Neutrality is great, especially for citizens of neutral states. There's a reason why the Swiss passport is the single most valuable personal document that a human being can own. Swiss citizens
Germany had a
visa-free
plan to invade
travel
Switzerland
and
too
entry
during
to
World War II.
185 countries.
That's
you will never be extradited from Switzerland to another country, no matter what crime you committed
You gotta
abroad,
feel
even
bad
if
for
it is
Belgium, you know?
genocide. You're able to open a bank account almost everywhere in the world. You have the least restrictions on owning foreign bank accounts, as well as on owning and transferring foreign currencies, foreign assets, and foreign property.
That is absolutely true. I mean, if you guys don't know, Mexico is also a very neutral state, and the Mexican passport is actually like pretty decent. We don't get to go to the U.S., of course, without a visa, and I think also Australia has like visa restrictions. But overall, the Mexican passport is pretty good, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is a neutral country. So it is a benefit for a citizen of a neutral country.
In 152 countries, and even enter 52 of these without their passports. Swiss citizenship is the most valuable citizenship in the world, followed by Singaporean citizenship. Neutral citizenship is more valuable than
citizenship. It'd be nice, right? It'd be nice to live in Switzerland. Like, they are balling. Let's face it, Switzerland was going to make Germany pay for it. It would have been a very interesting invasion.
Switzerland, Austria, Singapore, Costa Rica, Ireland, Japan, and Panama grant their holders more economic and travel liberties than the passports of other countries in their regions. Neutrality, if well managed, is very beneficial to citizens. And this is not just restricted to neutral states that are democratic. A non-democratic neutral state like Singapore can grant the same benefits, and it is also not restricted to what is commonly known as the West. Yugoslavia, for example, was the single most open and well-functioning of all the communist states. Yugoslav neutrality meant
Tito,
that
you know, he
Yugoslav
wasn't
citizens
afraid of
had
Stalin.
far more liberties and benefits than citizens of any other communist state. They could travel abroad, get educated abroad, attain and spend foreign currencies. Neutrality can also be mismanaged though. Mexico is a neutral state, but plagued by instability, Mexico was never able to take advantage of this in the same way that Panama and Costa Rica did. Neutrality can only
absolutely
provide
true.
benefits to citizens
It
if
is
there's
sad.
a functioning state behind it that can guarantee those benefits to citizens. If the state is dysfunctional, neutrality itself can gradually erode. But above all, neutrality comes at a cost. Almost every neutral country has
Poor Yugoslavia, their successor state of Serbia, it is. Did you hear about the skirmishes of the Afghan-Iranian border? Jesus, no, I have not. Is the Taliban going crazy against Iran, or like that could be a new war if both sides don't negotiate? Oh my God, that would be an interesting war, though. I don't think Iran could take on Afghanistan. I mean, Afghanistan can't take on Iran either, but Afghanistan can do what Afghanistan does best, hide in the mountain and wait for the enemy to come at you. So that'd be an interesting war, dude. That'd be a real mess. The Taliban and Iran never got along. If America had not invaded Afghanistan, then Iran would have done it. Wow. I guess I sort of imagined Iran they weren't a fan of the Taliban, but I didn't knew it was that deep, like the possibility of an invasion. The Taliban said they could conquer Iran in 24 hours. Bro, they're so funny sometimes, unironically.
Mandatory military service and usually keeps an effective military force. As valuable as the Swiss passport is, all Swiss men have to serve a mandatory 5 years of their life.
In Mexico, this is also technically true, but I haven't done it. I haven't done it. The Taliban stormed the Iranian embassy and chopped off their diplomats. Wow. Oh my God. Damn, that's brutal though. That's like a huge political crisis.
In the Swiss army. Switzerland has one of the largest
Oh, that was in the
Europe
90s,
and
though.
spends
Oh,
huge
okay.
sums
I mean,
maintaining
it's still
that
pretty
army.
savage.
And this is to guarantee Swiss neutrality, because one thing we often forget about
Oh, it's not
neutrality,
5 years?
as
Oh,
mentioned
okay.
before, is that neutrality, despite all its benefits, ultimately
Yeah, that sort of surprised me. 5 years seems like a long ass time, Even I think South Korea has like a couple of years, and that seems like too much,
means that you will stand alone in case of war. You have no friends. You also have no enemies. But because of this, everyone is a potential enemy. If you want an idea of how big defense spending can be for neutral countries and how damaging it can also be, all you need to do is look at Yugoslavia. It is commonly known by now that one of the main reasons Yugoslavia collapsed was its massive, crippling national debt. That national debt came to be through two factors. First, Tito took a huge loan from the IMF in the 1950s.
Oh yeah, I
that he
think
knew
I've heard about
Yugoslavia
this,
could
yeah.
never pay back, but he didn't care. Tito was convinced that capitalism would collapse and end within his lifetime, so he took this massive IMF loan to build Yugoslav infrastructure in the belief that the bank...
Bro, he took a loan because he thought capitalism was like about to collapse. Holy shit, dude. That's so bad. Oh my God. I mean, did you expect that anything else from a guy like Tito? I didn't. But yeah, that's funny. That's funny as hell, bro. What a G. Yugoslavia was getting bullied for half their entire existence. Yeah, that's true though. It didn't work out, but it took a lot of balls. Yeah, for absolutely.
He borrowed the money
Tito
from
had a lot of
no
balls.
longer
I don't think
exist in
anyone
a
can
few
deny
decades.
that.
And the second factor that so immensely racked up the Yugoslav national debt, and which often is overlooked, was Yugoslav defense spending. Yugoslav defense spending was massive, and for good reason. The Soviet Union had plans to invade Yugoslavia and turn it into a Soviet puppet on at least 3 occasions. Tito had spies in the Warsaw Pact who told him of this, but Tito had to also worry about a
Poor
possible
Yugoslavia,
invasion by
900
NATO.
IQ play.
So Tito had to build a Yugoslav army that could on its own fight off a Warsaw Pact invasion, which meant buying a huge amount of Western weapons, but Tito also had to build a Yugoslav army so it could fight off a NATO invasion, which meant buying
That's
an
crazy,
equally big
dude.
arsenal of Soviet weapons. But to add the cherry on top of this defense bill, Tito remembered the Hitler-Stalin Pact, when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union conspired to carve up Poland. He was haunted by that event and feared that America...
No
and the
way,
Soviet
bro. He wanted to fight at the same time, both the West and the Soviets.
Union could secretly conspire to invade Yugoslavia at the same time and carve it up between them. And because of this, Tito also built a huge domestic military industry so the Yugoslav army could fight against
No
both
fucking
NATO
shit,
and the
bro.
Warsaw Pact at the same time. All in all, this enormous defense spending created one of the largest weapons arsenals in Europe. And the enormous costs of creating and maintaining that huge
I guess that's why a lot of the weapons in the black market, I mean, not that I know, right? But a lot of the weapons in the legal market, come from the former Yugoslav republics, right? So that's actually pretty funny.
arsenal are one of the main reasons for the collapse of Yugoslavia. In a cruel bit of irony, that arsenal was in the end used by the peoples who made up Yugoslavia against each other. And
yeah.
more than that, much of the massive Yugoslav weapons arsenal just disappeared into the hands of criminal organizations and black market arms dealers. Yugoslav weapons were used in Italian mafia crimes, in Islamist terrorist attacks in France, and have turned up in almost every conflict since the year 2000, from Afghanistan to
fucking
Iraq
insane,
to Lebanon
dude.
to Syria to Mali to the Mexican drug war. Ironically, the defensive guarantor of Yugoslav neutrality, which was one of the main pillars for global peace and security during the Cold.
I think he's living pretty clearly that you can't really fight alone, right? You can't just expect to be able to fight everyone at once, right? You sort of need help. Even the Americans, who supposedly can fight two superpowers at the same time, right? That's the whole purpose of their army, fighting the second and third largest armies combined. I don't think they could do that alone, you know? There's footage of the Taliban forces during U.S. military vehicles to the border. They attacked several Iranian border forts. Of course, they had to do it in American vehicles, you know? Maybe it's... is this Argentina's strategy? Just keep borrowing until capitalism collapses? Dude, Argentina is even worse than Turkey. They have like 100% inflation. That country is like in serious trouble. I know that right now Pakistan is like the one really in like a dire situation, but Argentina in like a few years, it's going to be the next Pakistan. You know, that country will collapse 100%. They have like no functioning economy. Argentina had such a promising future before the Great Depression. Yeah, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. I mean, it was almost as wealthy, and I think at some point even wealthier than the U.S. itself. Argentina, that's why Europeans wanted to go to Argentina so bad. And then, you know, bad governments, corruption, fascist dictators, and now some modern socialism, you know. Just bad governments, you know, bad governments.
War ended up becoming one of the main contributors to global insecurity after the collapse of Yugoslavia.
You keep getting censored, really? A lot of people have said that, but it has to be like some YouTube filter. I don't think I can like turn it off or something. A lot of people have said that they keep getting censored too, you know? It's really
defense
weird.
spending, in general, tended to be very large, especially during the
Not sure
Cold
if the
War.
footage of
There are only
reels,
few
but the
neutral
Wagner
countries
group
that do not have large
was
defense
Fortnite
spending,
dancing
like
on
Costa Rica,
Bakhmut?
a country that abolished its
What
military
world
in
this is? Oh my
1949
God.
and simply assumed that nobody will ever
Censor
invade
much
it
like
anyway.
living
A
in
bold
China.
strategy, you may
I know,
say,
bro.
but
You think
so
it's
far
weird.
it
I
has
swear it's
actually
not me,
worked.
bro.
In Europe, since the end of the Cold War, many European neutral countries have cut down their defense spending, and for them, this war is a considerable wake-up call, in particular for one country, Ireland. Because Ireland is a bit of an exception, kind of like Costa Rica, because Ireland also barely ever invested in defense before. Before this war broke out, the Russian Air Force sometimes simulated nuclear attacks on Ireland, but the Irish usually just dismissed this as a Russian macho stupidity or joked about it. But a mere months before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Ireland had scuffles with the Russian Navy mucking about in her territorial waters.
Bro, what's up with like Russian submarines and Russian ships just like bullying everyone? Like, how is that not called out more often? That's first of all. And second, I was surprised to hear about Ireland. I guess it is a neutral country the more you think about it, but it's not necessarily who you think about when you think about a neutral country, right? Especially in Europe, you think about Switzerland, right? Maybe Austria, maybe Finland. Ireland, it's a little surprising. Russia has been bullying Ireland too. Jesus Christ.
This is a huge
Considering
threat
what's
to
happening in
Ireland.
Bakhmut, I wouldn't be celebrating.
For example, cut Ireland's
They're not doing well,
underwater
right?
internet
Which is
cable
good. I hope
infrastructure.
Ukraine
There's
obviously
little to nothing
recover
Ireland could
Bakhmut
do
and
about it, why it would wreck
all of their
almost
territory.
the entire Irish economy overnight. The Irish also realized that they have little to nothing to confront a Russian nuclear bomber. Right now, and this may surprise you, Ireland barely even has an air force or air defense.
What?
If a Russian nuclear bomber or navy vessel were heading for Ireland, the Irish could literally do nothing but beg the English to help them. Let's be clear about one thing. Ireland will not give up its neutrality.
Why does Ireland doesn't have like a functioning army? I guess it's a small country, right? I mean, what, 4 million people live in Ireland? It's not like you can have a massive army, but I'm sure the Irish can pull something out, you know? I'm sure they can do something about their defense. It's a little weird that they well, I guess that's the point of the video, right? You know, neutrality is really dangerous.
Is at this point
for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russia would send its ships and jets into UK waters. Wow, we had to scramble our jets to see them off, to send them off. Jesus Christ. King Charles III first royal decree invade Ireland. Ireland is so rich because the UK is their shield. It is kind of
Core
their
part
shield,
of
you know.
Irish national and political identity. But I
this
do
doesn't
believe that
work.
the Irish will now invest considerably more in defense. And that in terms of how the war in Ukraine impacts neutral European states, I believe it will have the biggest impact on Ireland. In the coming years, we will probably see the Irish discuss their defense more, especially how they can protect their territorial waters and airspace. Predictions are a fickle thing to make, but I would not be surprised if the Irish will be going to Sweden in the coming years to buy a fleet of Gripens to guard their seas and airspace. Of course, alternatively, Ireland could do deeper defense cooperation with Britain, but doing that would open the door to potentially ending neutrality.
You're
in
not
general,
neutral
which
anymore.
is why I do not think the Irish will do that. And really, the only thing Ireland would need to defend itself is an air force and
I don't think the Irish would want some sort of defense pact with the UK, you know? I don't think the Irish people would want that.
anti-ship missiles. The reason why I called Ireland somewhat special is that among European neutral countries, Ireland has always been somewhat of an odd one out. Not just because Ireland has always slacked behind in defense spending. Neutrality means you will have to stand alone in the case of war. And because of that fact, neutral countries always heavily invest in having their own domestic defense industries. Look at any neutral country in Europe, and you will see that they all have massive defense industries. This may strike some viewers as weird, because there is a false and unfortunately very popular notion, especially among Americans, that neutrality means pacifism and demilitarization. And that is just untrue. Neutrality usually means that you are armed to the teeth so you can guarantee your neutrality. And because you are alone, it means you have to be able to make your own weapons. And Ireland was for decades the only...
I think it's the same reason that Mexico doesn't have a massive army, because their biggest threat is also their neighbor, you're right. I guess it's a good point, you know. But Mexico does not have a big army, but it does have some military. Well, you know, you're right. The Mexican military is actually quite small.
Only neutral country in Europe that had and still has no noteworthy defense industries whatsoever.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure
the odd
this
one
will
out, I
change
see.
in the coming decade. I'm convinced that Ireland will not give up its neutrality, but it will provide subsidies and tax incentives for the creation of a domestic defense industry. If we move on from Ireland,
the Irish
we also
always
saw
making
another
money
side
though.
of neutrality throughout the last year. At this point, I would like to go back to revisit a historic moment from the 1990s. On the 7th of May 1995, the Swiss President Caspar Tilliger, during a special session of the Swiss Parliament, apologized on behalf of the Swiss state and peoples to the victims of the Second World War. Well, you may ask, why did the Swiss do that? During the Second World War,
I think I heard about
Switzerland
this.
was neutral and was not part within the conflict. Well, Switzerland refused to grant entry to fleeing Jews, and Switzerland continued to do business with and collaborate with the Nazi regime. It helped exchange foreign currencies for the Nazis, it provided tradable resources, it helped in the processing and sale of stolen goods, from gold teeth ripped from the corpses of dead Jews, art stolen from...
Yeah, they did a lot of business with some of the resources extracted. First off by the Nazis, but, you know, transferred by the Swiss, you know? Yeah, I don't see Ireland raising their military soon. Maybe it's similar to Costa Rica, which doesn't have a military at all. Yeah,
national
maybe you're right.
and
Maybe
private
that's why, you know?
to exchanging the national
I mean,
gold
who would
reserves
invade
that the
Costa Rica,
Nazis stole
really?
from the national banks of Czechoslovakia, Poland, Austria, Belgium, and others. The stereotype of the Swiss banker hoarding
Credit
Nazi
sus,
gold
yeah.
exists for a reason, because it is based on real historical events, a history the Swiss eventually confronted in the 1990s and apologized for. The Swiss have since the 1990s viewed their neutrality differently. They are still largely passive when faced with outside conflict. But the Swiss are far less likely to do business with aggressor countries and will increasingly ask questions about the efficacy of the assets and partners.
Yeah, I don't think Switzerland is like that anymore. Sure, they still have like a huge banking industry, but I don't think Switzerland is like the destination to put your dirty money. You know, I think now there's newer places where you can really store that kind of money. I think Switzerland has really moved on from that dirty money image that they had, you know?
with. This is a slow and
Hey,
gradual
Mexico.
political process that has been happening in Switzerland since the
Crapo.
1990s.
Oh my God.
Italian viewers probably know a lot about this. Swiss banks were for decades a lifeline that kept the Italian mafia alive. But with the change in attitude in the 1990s, the Swiss finally stopped taking Italian mafia money. Many critics of neutrality often say that it is just an excuse to be a coward. I don't think that is true. I would argue that the biggest moral weakness of neutrality is that it can be little more than a thin veneer to hide behind while profiteering from conflict and the misery of others. It can therefore be self-centered and almost parasitic. The Swiss learned their lessons from their mistakes during the Second World War, and we are consequently not seeing the Swiss repeat them today. The Swiss are, for example, condemning Russia, and that is very, 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 very significant. I cannot overstate how significant this is for European politics. I mean, do you have any idea how long-lasting and unchanging Swiss neutrality has been?
For the last 500 years, if there's war,
What?
we are not there.
The fact that the Swiss took a position on a war, that is a really big deal and potentially marks a huge change in how the Swiss do foreign policy. It is like seeing a pig with laser eyes fly. But since the war in Ukraine, we are also to a degree still seeing the sort of passive phony neutrality that Switzerland practiced before the 1990s. But not in Switzerland, but in Austria. Yes, Austria shipped small arms, blankets and some humanitarian aid to Ukraine, but Austria is also using its neutral status to circumvent sanctions and allow its banking sector to continue operations in Russia. Austrian banks still operate
Bad
in Russia,
Austria.
even providing financial services to soldiers and function now as a means by which Russia can still access financial
Are they really?
services in the West. Within
I mean, we mentioned previously that Austria was like an extremely neutral nation as well. It's not that surprising, but wow. When you are more neutral than Switzerland, I don't know if necessarily that's a great thing. Yeah, Austria's acting weird. I think Slovakia has lately also acted kind of weird. A lot of countries in that region of Central Europe are kind of acting weird.
In Austria itself, there seems to be close to no
Hungary
opposition
has
to
acting-
this. And
has
since I
acted
live
weird
here,
for,
I
like,
can tell
years
you
now.
that from what I see, many Austrian conservatives, but especially the political right, want Austria to be more like Switzerland. Not only in terms of state powers being handed down more to regional governments and deregulating the banking sector, but also in terms of how to view neutrality. Many on the Austrian political right believe that Austria should adopt the type of neutrality that Switzerland abandoned in the 1990s. Serbia is increasingly also practicing this type of neutrality, and it really looks like Hungary is increasingly questioning its own NATO membership and would instead prefer to practice the type of neutrality that Austria and Serbia is increasingly practicing. I believe these three countries will increasingly work together to
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? Why is Serbia on the list? They're not necessarily neutral. I think they're very open about who they support, but some of the conservatives and the regulating banks,
operate.
especially nowadays when the banks are really fucking up a lot of things.
It's important to point this out because a lot of ill-informed commentators have been praising the recent politics.
It's
of these
always
countries
the
as a sort of
Americans, right?
pacifist neutrality, but that is really not the case. Hungary is still a NATO member, even though one has to increasingly ask why that is even still the case, while Austria and Serbia are really increasingly practicing the type of selfish for-profit neutrality that Switzerland practiced during the Second World War. But I believe one of the most important changes regarding neutrality in Europe is through what we all lose with the end of Swedish and Finnish neutrality. That is because Sweden and Finland practiced a sort of active neutrality. Finland's role in negotiating the Cold War détente, creating the OSCE, and acting as the main force for negotiating peace and relieving tensions in Europe, especially under the leadership of its former president Urho Kekkonen, is not something to scoff at or dismiss, even though many just
they support Russia heavily, I think. Yeah, they are very pro-Russia, it seems.
In the diplomatic history of Europe throughout the 20th century. Finland was the European leader in creating a framework for lasting peace and stability in Europe. a position it took and successfully exercised due to its neutrality. And the Finnish people can legitimately be proud of this. Over the course of just a year, decades of hard diplomatic work by Finland to
fraternal
ensure peace in
brotherhood.
Europe have been trampled upon by Russia. To those who know European diplomatic history, watching the events of the last year must be very disheartening. But let us also not forget about Sweden, because the Swedes are like nobody else engaged in the foreign policy of active neutrality. From sending peacekeepers to the Congo to protect Congolese villages from French mercenaries hired by Belgian
Yeah,
mining
you know what?
companies, to
Yeah.
being
Sweden has always kind of been like that guy, you know? They're always talking about how, they were against the Iraq war and, how they were against the United States going into Afghanistan. And, they're doing all these things against France and Belgium. So, Sweden has always kind of been that guy. And you know what? Good for them.
the leading European voice in opposition to South African apartheid and supporting Algerian independence from France.
Damn.
The leading European voice against the human rights violations by the Pinochet regime. The leading European voice in opposition to the Vietnam War. The
Yeah, that's
leading
also
European
true,
critic
yeah.
of racial segregation in the United States. The leading European voice arguing for Kurdish autonomy and rights of self-determination.
And for Palestine,
to being
too.
the voice for
Wow.
Palestinian statehood.
Sweden
and
is always the one to
self-determination
call
in
out
Europe.
both sides.
Now,
yeah.
you may think of all these causes whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that Sweden did champion an important role in Europe and, to an extent, even the wider West. Sweden basically used its neutrality, while also being a country economically and politically integrated in the West, to actively go out into international politics to argue a case in favor of those disenfranchised, overlooked, or unjustly
Nice.
maligned or attacked
Sweden
by the
always
West.
taking the
Sweden
W, you
used
know?
its neutrality to claim the role of being
They're
the
just too
West's
good
moral
for this world.
conscience, especially under their Prime Minister Olof Palme. Something the Swedes can be very proud of. And that is over now. With Swedish neutrality ending, Sweden is
The
bound
Swedes are
to
too
give
good.
up
We
on
don't
its
deserve
active
them.
neutrality. I got a bit of a backlash a few months ago when I tweeted that I was still somewhat sad that Europe will now be bereft of the benefits of the active neutrality that Finland and Sweden engaged in. And maybe you now understand why I have that sentiment. Those torches of active neutrality that both Sweden and Finland held will now be dropped. And I have to ask, who will pick them up? A reason I made this video is not just to hop on an inevitable trend of uploads being promoted in the algorithm with the NATO membership of Finland. I made this video because I have several thousand subscribers from Switzerland and Ireland, and I would like to appeal with this video in particular to you. I doubt that Austria or Serbia will pick up the torches dropped by Sweden. and
Serbia
Finland.
again?
They
Bro.
seem on a course to establish a passive neutrality. That is
What's
mainly
up with
self-centered,
Serbia, dude?
and
I
there is
don't
no
get it.
political will in both of these countries to engage in an active neutrality. So my eyes and hopes right now are on Switzerland and in particular on Ireland. I would encourage any Swiss and Irish viewers to think about this, to consider having a conversation about this, if possible with your fellow citizens, on what you imagine your country's neutrality should be, and to talk about what you believe your country's role in Europe should be. Acting as Europe's moral consciousness, as the Swedes once used to do, may be befitting as a new role for Ireland in Europe and maybe even the wider West. Being Europe's chief negotiator and guarantor for peace and stability in Europe may be a befitting new role for the Swiss. It may be time for you to go pursue a more active neutrality, or at the very least consider it and discuss it.
Oh, damn. What an
This video is a
end. Whoa,
critique of
whoa. Hold up. That was kind of abrupt. I mean, he didn't even say goodbye. There was no sponsor again. There was no outro. Just... What was that,
This
bro?
video-
Who ends a video like that, man? Well, anyways, you know what? This was actually a really good video. I was so into this. It was a really interesting video. You know, I haven't, honestly, some of his latest videos weren't like, I wasn't feeling them. But this one, I think this one was really good. He has a lot of good takes. He really does. It was really interesting. And to be honest, he has, again, good takes that I think people in Europe should have those conversations. I think they are having those conversations, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see where does it all end. Who takes, like he said, the torches of neutrality, right? It's weird to me that he keeps mentioning Serbia. I don't know why. I guess they are not being extremely vocal about the Russians, but I think they are still well in the Russian camp. So I don't know. It's kind of weird there. Maybe he knows something that I don't in terms of news regarding the foreign politics of Serbia. It's interesting to see what Austria and Hungary, right, are doing. That's a little weird. And again, I didn't expect that conclusion about Ireland. Damn YouTube, what was wrong with my first message if the second one was the same? Yeah, it's weird. I'm sorry, guys. I just don't know what's wrong with chat. Well, like the YouTube chat, Ireland probably stopped wanting active neutrality after the siege of Yaudoville. Anyways, guys, the other day, I had like a couple of videos that I wanted to watch about Mexico, especially this one. It is a little long. I hope that you guys don't mind. It's also like 30 minutes. But man, it's about the Mexican economy, and the title, it's very bold. Mexico is about to get rich. That's a bold claim, all right? That's a bold statement. And I, for once, as a Mexican, I want to know what he's talking about. I do know more about the Mexican economy, because it's where I live. I do know what's going on here. And I sort of can't imagine what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about the very large and growing manufacturing industry here, I'm guessing. But I don't know. It's a long video. And, the title is just bold, right? So I just want to watch it. I can't stay, but I'm happy you restarted doing lives. Fritos, it's always good to see you, man. And don't worry, I'll do many more lives where you can join us. So, are you guys ready? Let's do this, man. I think it's going to be hella fun. It's time that Mexico takes its place as one of the American countries that surpasses the colonial country in terms of economic might. I think we are very close to surpass Spain, and I would be very happy to do so as well,
Mexico should be a failed state.
Whoa,
This has nothing to do with
okay, Mexico should be a failed state. It's not the first time I hear that. I know that a lot of people, especially the ones, the sort of geographic determinist people, say that Mexico has terrible geography, and it does. It has like terrible geography. I don't think necessarily would make it a failed state. Well, maybe. I don't know. Let's hear his points. That's a random start, I know. It's random.
people, culture, or even the politics, but rather with a more powerful force that cannot be changed: geography. Most
Geography.
powerful nations have two key characteristics.
That's southern Mexico,
a temperate
by the way.
climate that is favorable for agricultural production, and flat land that is easy for trade and economic expansion. Mexico is far from being temperate or flat. The north is dominated by desert, which makes agricultural and economic growth incredibly difficult. The south is a rugged jungle, which has forced much of the local population into subsistence living. If that didn't make the Mexican geography challenging enough, the nation is full of mountain chains that makes infrastructure incredibly costly. Mexico's greatest geographic asset, its coastlines, is largely mitigated by the rugged interior. Getting goods from the Gulf side to the Pacific side is not cheap, easy, or quick.
It's expensive,
If that
dude.
wasn't challenging enough, Mexican
I mean, just think about it. Trying to move something with, there's so many deserts, there's so many mountains, there's a lot of thick jungle, it's just very hard to move stuff around Mexico, and it's just really, really complicated. Yeah, so I despise geographic determinists as they ignore humanity itself. Yeah, Argentina has great geography and no one wants to pretend that they're doing great. Exactly. Yeah, it's not, sure, geography, it's very important. And I've read the book from Peter Sehan, the Accidental Superpower, right? Which he talks about the American geography and how it's great. And it is great. And that probably is very relevant. But there's a lot of other factors, right? Like, well, you mentioned humanity itself, right?
Rivers are terrible for navigation. The total
We also
water
have no
flow
rivers.
across all Mexican rivers is about 25% less than that of the Mississippi River alone. While the EU has the Rhine, and South America has the Amazon.
Nada.
Mexico has
Zero.
nothing, with the exception of the Grijalva River, which
Oh.
can only accommodate shallow draft vessels in certain spots. The lack of navigable rivers, paired with the mountainous interior, makes
Yeah. For sure. I always think of the fact that the capital. Oh yeah, the capital is on a lake. Yeah, I know, and that's supposedly some of the best geography we have to offer, really.
domestic trade a costly endeavor. The daunting geography not only
The
hinders
Spaniards
economic
were not known for long-term thinking. Yeah, you're
activity,
right.
but also political stability.
Look at all
Keeping
those
Mexico
mountains, bro.
united is no
That's
easy
a lot of
task.
mountains.
Shortly after gaining independence from Spain, Mexico would be rife with insurrections and rebellions.
Yeah.
The challenging geography made it easy for Texas and the provinces of Central America to secede from the motherland. Parts of the Yucatan also seceded
Well-
for several years before rejoining the fold. And when American President James Polk decided that it was time to take a few states from Mexico, the mountainous and arid geography made it difficult for Santa Anna to get troops to the front lines. 13
That is true, though. Of course, it's more complicated than that. There's a lot more factors going on, but we're not going to talk about those. However, yeah, sure, the geography at the end of the day does make it difficult to defend your own country, you know?
years
And that's
later,
Napoleon the Third.
Napoleon III decided that Mexico should be a puppet of the French
Yep.
Empire. But even the mighty French couldn't handle Mexico's geography.
Bro, can we catch a break? We have an invasion from the Americans, and like 10 years later, we have an invasion of the French. Can we catch a break, dude?
Mexican Republicans were able to remain in power in certain states and would push the French out in about 5 years.
Yeah.
Mexico's harsh geography would make political stability and economic advancement almost impossible. It made the nation an
Sure.
easy target for foreign intervention. The jungles, deserts, mountains, and lack of navigable rivers would be problematic enough on their
Yeah,
own.
exactly. Yeah. In between those interventions, we had a civil war. Yeah.
But all four of these features, combined within a country that is nearly 4 times the size of Spain, is a recipe for disaster. Mexico arguably has the worst geography in the world in terms of economic development and
Okay.
political stability. Mexico shouldn't only be a failed state, but should be in a perpetual state of chaos, similar to Afghanistan or the Congo.
Okay. Well, that's a big take. Okay, let's think a little bit about that. Mexico would be in perpetual state of chaos. I mean, you could argue it already kind of is, right? There's a lot of stuff going on always. There's already a lot of crime. There's already a lot of big criminal mafias that even control some parts of the country. So you could say it's already very chaotic, right? Yeah, a quarter of all Mexicans didn't survive that war. Yeah, it's crazy. I guess we avenged Mexico when we defeated Napoleon III. Oh yeah, we always make fun of that, you know? Thank God. We're very thankful to the Prussians.
Despite the insane geographical challenges, Mexico is actually doing pretty good. In fact, they're doing better than good. Mexico has the 13th largest economy,
I guess.
when accounting for purchasing power parity. This makes the Mexican economy larger than that of South Korea, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Australia, and the Netherlands. While Mexico had a
It's always great to see these GDP numbers and sort of think that the nation is doing really well. And in some cases, a lot of people are doing very well. I'm doing really well myself. So it's not like things are bad, but you always have to remember Mexico is a very unequal country. very similar to South Africa, for example, where a lot of the wealth is really concentrated in a few hands. And those people are living amazing lives, similarly to the first world countries, but then sort of everyone else is not. So you always have to think about that. Sure, Mexico as a country, I guess you could say, is doing pretty well. But inside the country, there are a lot of desperate people that are suffering, right? Don't think about Mexico in the same light you would think about South Korea, because it's just not.
Very turbulent history. The country has made huge gains in the past 100 years.
Similar to
Mexico's
these
explosive
GDP
growth
graphs.
is no coincidence. And by all indications, the Mexican economy will continue to enjoy impressive gains. The likelihood of Mexico reaching economic parity with G7 nations in the coming decades is practically a certainty. Through triumphant hard work, Mexico was able to conquer its formidable geography and get on the path to economic prosperity. Here's how they did it. But first, did you know that less than...
I don't know if there's a bunch of prosperity, you know, but whatever. Speaking of geographic determinism, South Korea, practically elevating them in the middle class. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my dad sends remittances to his parents who stayed in Mexico. Eventually, those hundreds of dollars per month was a lifesaver. And they do. They are a lifesaver for most families who receive
1%
remittances.
of the viewers of this channel are subscribers? If you enjoy the work I do...
So,
be
you
sure
know,
to subscribe
it's a growing
so you can
economy.
stay
I
up to
guess
date
that's
on my
good.
latest videos.
I am
The
sure
subscriber count also makes it easier
we
for
are
me to
going
get
to
replies
experience a
from
lot of
subject matter
growth,
experts
and a
when
lot of people are going to
researching
get better
videos.
jobs, but
Your support is appreciated.
it's still tough for a lot of people, you know?
When New Spain gained independence and became Mexico,
There we go, some
the
history.
young country was perpetually restless. Mexico would be rife with coups, guerrilla insurgencies, indigenous uprisings, and constitutions with very short lifespans. From 1824 to 1884, Mexico would have 35 different heads of state. Some of these transfers of power were peaceful.
Oh my God.
Others, not so much.
It's so weird to see them, you know, like
This high level of political instability, Mexico would struggle to get its
Santa
economy off
Ana,
the
dude.
ground.
That's fucking
Despite
crazy.
the political turmoil,
Look at him. He's
Mexico
still
became
going.
a world leader in the production of silver coins. When new silver deposits were discovered, entirely new cities
That image of shirtless Hidalgo is wild. I know.
would pop up to extract the precious metal. The silver would be purified with mercury and eventually make its way to Mexico City to be minted into coins.
I've heard about
Mexico's
this, yeah.
silver coins were the preferred global currency of the colonial era. The mint in Mexico City would stamp the coins with distinct ridges, a process that was nearly impossible to counterfeit. From the colonies of Upper Canada to the Manila gallons of East Asia, Mexican silver
Yeah, bro, he really did came every few years, you know? It's crazy.
coins could be found anywhere there is global trade. But Mexico was too good at producing silver coins. By overproducing, the coins would lose their value due to increased supply. Mexico's economy was overly reliant on silver. When
Obviously, now one of the fancier terms in an economy is diversification, right? An economy ideally should be sort of diversified. So if a certain industry is not doing well, the other industries are gonna still help to get some economic output. So ideally, your economy should be diversified, right? But Mexico in the 1800s, it basically depends on silver, you know? Silver, since the times of the Spanish Empire, was really important, right? The Spanish were also very famous for getting a lot of silver from Latin America. Of course, when the Spanish left, or the Mexicans kicked the Spanish out, the Mexicans now owned all of these silver. So they sort of continued that trend of processing silver and in this case, turning them into coins, which is something I didn't really knew Mexico was good at, but whatever, man. Bro took the motivation poster way too seriously. Or in Norway's case, instead of diversifying your economy, you can diversify the investments of your portfolio. Yeah, that's probably a little better, you know?
silver would go through bust cycles, the Mexican economy would be hit hard. Mexico's
Norway is really
over-reliance on
built
silver
different.
would start to change. when Porfirio Diaz rose to power in 1884. The dictator knew that Mexico had to diversify. To achieve this goal, Mexico must be interconnected by rail. Diaz improved Mexico's creditworthiness and secured loans from London bondsmen and German bankers, and quickly expanded Mexico's rail network. In 1873,
That's an interesting question. How does the Mexican government see or treat indigenous Mexicans? Hold up, Nope. There we go. So short answer is they don't. They don't see them. They just sort of ignore them and let them do their own thing. There aren't as many of them, I guess, so the government doesn't really pay too much attention. And the thing is, a lot of them are really integrated into Mexican society, so it's not like in the US where there's reservations and sort of the Native Americans have kept a lot of aspects of their culture. In Mexico, the indigenous culture keeps sort of dying, with each generation that passes. Less and less people speak indigenous languages. They are sort of adapting really well to the Mexican culture, I guess, and the government just doesn't pay attention to them, unfortunately, That's a good thing, really. I guess it's good, I heard reservations suck in the US. They do. They have like a lot of alcoholism problems, and they have a lot of gambling too. And I think that's the thing, you shouldn't really segregate people into reservations. I think you should include them in the general society and culture.
Mexico only had 472 kilometers of rail, but that would explode to nearly 20,000 kilometers in just 40 years. For a country as mountainous as Mexico, building a rail network is neither cheap nor easy. But the Mexicans, along with notable help from Asian immigrants, completed the challenging task. The rapid rail expansion would also create a connection to the United States via Juarez and El Paso. By connecting with their northern neighbor, Mexico was better suited to export precious metals and import cheap cotton to boost their textile industry. However, Mexico's dependence on US cotton would not last. With rail integration, Mexico could now grow their own cotton. Durango and Coahuila would emerge as major cotton producers, and the raw cotton would be processed into textiles
Until
in
they found
Guadalajara,
gold,
Puebla, and Mexico City. By 1910, Mexico was able to produce 78% of its own cotton. In the past, Mexico's economy was handcuffed to the price of silver, but with the newly built railroad, Mexico was building a more dynamic economy. The integrated economy was particularly beneficial to Monterrey, a city located about 1,000 kilometers northeast of Mexico City. Monterrey would emerge as Mexico's financial hub, full of merchants.
This would be a very industrial city. This would be a very wealthy, and it still is one of the most developed cities in Mexico, sort of, Or in Oklahoma's case, they found oil. Yeah, exactly.
Financiers that bolstered Mexican production and exports. Monterrey would expand into even newer industries, such as steel production, glass manufacturing, and world-famous Mexican beer.
Yeah.
With a bustling economy, Diaz decided that it was time to put Mexico on the gold standard. It was a clear signal to the world that Mexico was not just a stable country, but one full of attractive investment opportunities. While Diaz supercharged the Mexican economy, he had one major flaw that is common with dictators. He didn't want to give up power.
Yeah, well, that's sort of an understatement. I mean, well, this guy was pretty shitty, and we were talking about indigenous peoples before. This guy would be terrible to many indigenous communities and would almost sort of enslave them, would sort of implement a system of sort of servitude, it was very strange. This guy wasn't that great of a guy. Sure, he did diversify the economy and did all the stuff he mentioned, but he's not a good guy, and he neither should be remembered as a good guy,
The lack of mobility for the top leadership position In addition to poor treatment
And
of
he didn't
indigenous
want to give
people
up power. He
and
did not.
deteriorating labor conditions in Cananea and Rio Blanco, all made Mexico ripe for revolution. The revolutionary spirit was further fueled when Diaz indicated that he would remain dictator in May 1908, despite stating the contrary only 3 months earlier. As contemporary Justo Sierra said, "There are no institutions in the Republic of Mexico. There is only a man."
And there was
After
just
28
that guy.
years of the Porfirio
Let me
era,
change the title.
Mexico
of
was
the...
ready for a change. The revolution commenced on November 20th, 1910, only 3 months after the country celebrated its 100-year anniversary of independence. The Mexican Revolution would last for 10 to 30 years, depending on which historical analysis you prefer. While the revolution was founded on legitimate political grievances, it nonetheless crippled Mexico's economy. In 1914, Mexico had defaulted on its foreign debt obligations. The ability to attract foreign investment was non-existent. There was a tragic amount of lost lives during the revolution. Mexico's population decreased by 1 million in a single decade. To say that the revolution hindered economic development is a cynical
Or Mexicans thought this in school. Most of this, or a lot of this, yeah, it is an important part of Mexican history. A lot of kids, they try to learn, but in like many countries, a lot of people just aren't interested in history, so they sort of don't pay much attention to it.
understatement. As the revolution progressed, Mexico was more so operated by regional chieftains, as opposed to a united country.
Yeah.
Eventually, 2 chieftains from Sonora created what would become the Party of the Revolutionary Institution, better known as PRI, through complex political wrangling and military strong-arming. The PRI was able to make Mexico a united country again, although this was not a smooth nor peaceful transformation. The result would be a new political system, unlike any other.
Yeah. It was wicked. Well, no, I wouldn't say wicked. It was...
The
It was
PRI created
weird.
a new political system that can't be easily classified. It drew inspiration from several political philosophies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the PRI was sort of a mix of a monarchy, of communism, of a democracy, nationalism, socialism, and corporatism. Supposedly it was left wing, although it was very corporatistic, right? It was very, it promoted monopolies. I guess we'll see.
The PRI
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It had like a huge
can best be
meltdown.
described as a monarchy with term limits. The president of Mexico was as powerful as a king, but had a strict 6-year term limit. When his term was approaching its end, the president would handpick his successor. An election would be held for the new incoming president, and on at least a few occasions they actually counted the votes. Instead of having nobles with fiefdoms, Mexico would have other pillars of power: big banks, big businesses, and big labor unions, all of which circulated around big government. Unlike in capitalist societies with divisions of power, Mexico's pillars of power would collude with each other. Instead of competition, these
Yeah, that's 100% true. The banks worked for the corporations worked for the banks, and they all worked for the political party, the government, basically. So it was sort of, it sort of remains that way. Mexicans don't really have that much access to banking. Starting a business in Mexico is hard, right? You sort of gotta be on the top echelons of society in order to sort of get into this system.
institutions chose collaboration. Labor unions were mostly for show, and businesses felt no pressure to innovate. When workers defied their union bosses and went on strike, the government would send in the army. All land and subsoil would be property of the government, while the laws of land ownership and mineral rights sounds quite communistic. It is actually more similar to a monarchy. The PRI would either manage these assets themselves, or select which business could have a monopoly. The need to adapt and improve was practically non-existent for Mexican businesses. Having friends
Again, it sort of reminds you of a communist economy because the government controls the assets of the country itself, right? So the government controls the media, the government controls the oil. He mentioned the government literally controlled all of the soil in the land, right? So it wasn't technically communism, but I think you know. Oh, really? My father was part of protests in the 80s and early 90s. I'm remembering that he became, gosh, I can't read, guys. I'm so sorry. Embittered with his country when Mexico sent the army just straight up to shoot. Yeah, exactly.
in high places.
That's what they would do. They
was
would
far more
shoot
important. Banks provided little help to everyday Mexicans. Most loans were only accessible to Mexico's big businesses, not small entrepreneurs. Should a Mexican want to start their own business, receiving financing from a bank was practically impossible.
We don't do that
Expecting the
here.
government to assist in the development of small businesses was a foreign concept. Despite the neglect, many Mexican entrepreneurs moved forward with their ambitions. They would build their businesses, independent from any reporting to the banks or government. This was the birth of the informal economy in Mexico, fully functioning small businesses, operating without any bank or government services. The informal economy remains very much alive in present-day Mexico. Today, nearly 60% of all Mexican workers are employed in the informal economy.
This is a
This political
well-known
and economic
fact
system
in
meant that
Mexico.
Mexico would have a tiny middle class. Extreme income inequality was the norm. In certain years, Mexico's inequality would be quite comparable to that of apartheid South Africa.
Yes,
While
look at
this
that,
does sound
man.
very
Yeah,
dystopian,
that's fucking horrible.
it provided something that was desperately needed in Mexico.
Jesus
Stability.
Christ.
The Mexican Revolution was so brutal that the people would accept just about anything for the sake of peace. For the most part, the Mexican people tolerated this new structure, sacrificing economic
He mentioned something very important. This system was not perfect, as you can clearly see, but it provided one thing: stability. For all of its existence, Mexico as a country was very chaotic and always involved in some type of civil war or foreign conflict, or there was always happening. For a couple of years, for a few decades, in fact, this political system at the end of the day was able to sort of provide certain stability, you know? Sort of reminds me of how the modern Chinese communist government handles their own party, you know? It's sort of a pact with the people, right? As long as the Chinese party, the CCP is able to produce this sort of stability and prosperity, the people are going to be okay with the CPP being in power, right? So sort of reminds me of that system. Let me read a few comments. Does Mexico have any chaebol-like companies like Samsung, LG, Hyundai? It's different. The whole South Korean system is different. It doesn't work like that. But you could think, for example, I think you guys know Carlos Slim. He owns the big telecommunications company. In fact, he bought the assets of the Mexican company. And he owns most of the telecommunications in the country. And in fact, he's moved operations through all of Latin America. I guess that would be like the closest thing, you know. But no, it doesn't work like in South Korea, you know. I think all of this knowledge is making me have a migraine. Yeah, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of information.
economic progress, for the sake of political stability, was a core component of Mexico's social contract. Mexico's elites got
And a good
very,
chunk of the populace is not
very
surviving
rich in
it.
this system.
I can't blame
But
the
their
average
greed was
person for just wanting
insatiable.
peace.
There is one other prominent pillar of power, completely independent from the collusion scheme: the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
When it was President Calles' turn to rule Mexico, He attempted to curb the power of the church.
Oh, I know what he's
rehashed
gonna talk
communistic
about.
propaganda and added a dash of anti-Europeanism to rally the people against the church.
Yeah, this is not good.
It didn't work. Calles would enforce many anti-Catholic laws, which included restricting the freedom to worship and the persecution of European-born clergy. Perhaps the most draconian measure was using schools to indoctrinate children.
It's
The
pretty
president
interesting, right?
declared,
It's a good video.
"We
I
must
love it.
enter and take possession of the mind of childhood, the mind of
Whoa.
the youth."
What
Mexicans
the
across
fuck?
all economic classes and in nearly every state took to the streets. When that didn't work, they took up arms.
And I think that's the guy who created the agency that handles education in Mexico. So I think that's a very weird comment. I don't know what was that about.
These fighters became known as the Cristeros. Mexico was entering another dark chapter in its history. A very dark chapter.
We are in like the 1930s. No, 1920s, 1930s, about there.
The Cristero Rebellion. Now, this video is about to cover some disturbing events. So much so that some of you may want to jump forward a couple of minutes. Feel free to jump forward to this time to
What?
continue the story. Mexicans
Okay, well, what are you gonna talk about, dude? Okay, you know what?
tolerate poverty,
it.
but they would not tolerate having their religious freedoms taken away. Calles would be brutally aggressive against defiant Catholics. And I do mean brutal. Many innocent worshippers and priests would join the dearly departed.
Yeah, I
This
know.
suppression only encouraged more civilians to join the Cristeros.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be a lot, guys. I think he's gonna cover some sensitive topics, so I'm gonna leave it playing.
But
But
not all of the Cristero fighters
if you don't wanna
were perfectly
watch-
honorable in their quest for religious freedom. The most
I know where
radical
this is going, yeah.
Cristeros would deliberately target public school teachers. Hundreds of teachers would become victims in this conflict.
oh wait, what's wrong with this photo, dude? Am I looking correctly, or am I just too high? What's wrong with their eyes, dude? It looks so weird, and they're all looking at me and shit. That's odd as hell. Well, anyways, I'm sorry for just pausing it. This photo looks awful, dude. The more you look at it, at the faces and shit, what is going on?
Public school teachers. Hundreds of teachers
Yeah,
would
he
become
went full
victims in
stalling,
this
yeah.
conflict.
Similar.
The targeted teachers became known as maestros desorejados, teachers without ears. In some cases, this was a very literal description. If a targeted teacher experienced a quick and painless departure, they would be amongst the fortunate. The most extreme Cristeros had a preference for the same.
You know it's bad when in a war they are going after the teachers, you know? I think that's always a terrible sign. I mean, like, really? You're going after teachers? It's just like a really bad sign, you know? Going Pol Pot mode. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something creepy about it.
Same techniques
It
that
was-
were
it was
used during the
creepy.
Spanish Inquisition. Bishops would condemn the targeting of teachers and civilians, but controlling the extremist wing of the Cristeros wasn't an easy task. Mexico's culture war had gone
It
hot,
wasn't that
really
extreme,
hot,
you know? It
and
really
everyone
wasn't that
suffered.
extreme.
Despite seeing Mexico crumble before him, President Calles would not back down from his anti-Catholic crusade. His hand-picked successor would be taken out by a Cristero fighter, which created a succession crisis of its own. The message was clear. There would be no peace in Mexico without religious freedom. The official end date of the Cristero Rebellion is a matter of debate, but most agree that 250,000 people would not survive the conflict. President Cardenas is largely credited for sowing the seeds of peace. His administration restored the right to worship, and went as far as arresting Calles. Catholic bishops did their part too. They created a legion that infiltrated Cristero rebel groups, and any rebel who advocated
It's just good that Mexico isn't known for this stuff. Yeah, thank God, dude. Thank God nobody hears about this, because it is a pretty dark part in our history. And he just went like 2 minutes and talked about this. I can't blame her for being anti-Catholic. I can't either. I mean, I'm not a Catholic, right? So I can't say I disagree with his methods, obviously. I do believe in religious freedom, so at the end of the day, his methods were wrong. Although, well, the Catholic Church isn't necessarily always being a force of good, you know? Felt a little bit of dread when I focused on their eyes in the photo. Exactly. Dude, that was exactly what I was talking about. The eyes, bro. Look at the eyes in some of these photos. There's something eerie about
The
this.
targeting of civilians would be expelled.
It's just too much, man.
Despite the progress towards
Old
peace,
school Mexico is just too
the
much.
conflict would have a permanent impact on Mexico's power structure. The church would forever remain an independent pillar of power, and the relationship between church and state would remain rocky for many decades. Mexico would not have diplomatic relations with the Vatican until 1992.
Yeah.
Despite the tensions between church and
crazy.
state, the saints of economics were about to bless Mexico. The nation was entering a miracle.
The Mexican miracle. So we are entering World War II around this time. So for you guys to have an idea, I think he's going to talk about it, but even then, that's pretty awesome. Here comes the Mexicans' conspiracy theories for random photos.
While far from being a liberal democracy, the PRI proved its value during its first international crisis, the Great Depression.
Oh, the
While
Great
most of
Depression.
the world was grappling with the economic crisis, the Mexican economy proved to be more resilient. Collusion of power can have its perks. During the Depression, the PRI would send shockwaves throughout the international community. The party decided to nationalize the entire oil industry throughout Mexico. Prior to nationalization, most oil extraction was conducted by the American company Standard Oil and the British company El Aguila. The PRI would seize all of the oil-producing assets, although the companies would receive compensation for the seizure. With the newly acquired assets and nationalized oil rights, the PRI created a new state-owned oil monopoly called Petróleos Mexicanos.
Oh, you
better
know
known
this
as-
from Hearts of Iron? Dude, really? Oh, I gotta learn how to play, dude. I have the game, but I actually don't know how to play him. I'm not Christian, but what do you mean by that? I don't remember what I said, dude. To be honest.
Pemex. Nationalizing an entire industry is a risky endeavor.
Yeah, really.
Especially when it antagonizes the British and the Americans. In many cases, it can do more harm than good. It scares off private investment, can trigger aggressive tariffs, and tends to result in a shortage of competent business management. However, the PRI had impeccable timing. The oil industry was nationalized in 1938, on the eve of World War II. As
yeah.
the war unfolded, neither the US nor the UK could afford to sanction Mexican oil.
Of course.
The demand for oil would skyrocket during the war, and the nationalization of the liquid hydrocarbons would prove to be very profitable for Mexico. The PRI also introduced tariffs.
So, in a way, in a weird way, you can think about Mexico from like the 1940s, right, up until the 1970s, sort of as a petro state, you know, not that different from a place like Iran or a place like even Saudi Arabia. Mexico was producing a lot of oil, and a lot of the government was being funded by oil. So as the video continues, sort of think about Mexico in that light. You know, Mexico at this moment becomes a petro state.
To bolster the local economy. In normal geopolitical environments, new tariffs tend to lead to
Mr.
trade
Goofy
wars.
Mustache, Austrian
But the
painter.
Anglosphere had far higher priorities than retaliating against Mexico.
They did. They
keep the
had the
Mexican oil
Americans and the
flowing,
British by the balls.
The US and the UK had no choice. If they wanted Mexican oil, then they would have to tolerate Mexican
They would have to
tariffs.
pay, baby.
This made Mexico a quasi-ally to the United States and the United Kingdom, and they would try to remain militarily neutral in the conflict.
We were just talking about neutrality. So Mexico would try to remain neutral, but as a major producer of oil and a major seller of oil to the Allies, the Germans attacked Mexico.
But Mexico's neutrality would not last. In the spring of 1942, German U-boats sank 2 Mexican oil tankers in the Gulf of Mexico. Mexico demanded an apology from the Germans, A demand that
Wow, look at
went
this.
unfulfilled. After receiving no
This is sort of Mexican
response,
World War II propaganda. This is actually like very rare to see, you know? So this translates to remember 13th of May 1942. So remember when the the Axis sank our ships.
a demand that went unfulfilled.
And this is sort of an eagle with the colors of Mexico destroying a Nazi flag, but I guess he censored it. So this is
After
pretty
receiving
cool.
no response from Germany, Mexico would formally declare war on the Axis powers. This declaration would lead to the formation of the 201st Mexican Fighter Squadron, better known as the Aztec Eagles. The Eagles were based in Manila Bay in the Philippines, and were involved in nearly 800 combat sorties. After the war, the Aztec Eagles were welcomed as heroes. In the post-war economy,
World War II
Mexico
vets.
would adopt a very different economic strategy than most of the world. The prevailing economic theory predicted that international trade would ensure international peace.
Wait, they sunk their ships? Why Mexico? I think Germany was just angry that we were selling oil to the Americans, so they just attacked their ships, you know? I guess it is what it is. Germany had no chill, yeah. None whatsoever. Mexico also took in some Spanish Republicans, right? Yeah, about 50,000, you know, which is a significant number, I guess.
By trading for foreign goods,
Makes sense
there
now,
would be
yeah.
no need to colonize or wage war for desired materials. Why go to war when every nation can get rich through trade? This economic theory would be the main inspiration for the European Union and modern globalization. Despite the new global trend, Mexico, along with most of Latin America, opted to stick with the more mercantilist strategy. In the post-war world, Mexico kept their economy isolated, with high tariffs, import quotas, and licenses that restricted imported goods. The Mexican economy would remain Mexican, regardless of what foreign economists thought. As Mexico was quite protectionist, exports would be a small sliver of the economy. Most of these exports were raw materials, such as precious metals and oil. As tariffs tend to be retaliatory, Mexican goods would be artificially expensive on the global market. Additionally, protected economies tend to produce inferior goods. Without pressure from foreign competition,
What he's saying is really important because these were the basis for the Mexican economy, a very closed economy, an economy that mainly relied on internal growth. So it was very slow. At the time when everyone and their mother were talking about international trade, right? So Mexico never hopped into that ship of international trade, still remaining a very closed economy. It sort of worked a little bit for them, and you'll see that in this era, the Mexican miracle, it was sort of working. But at the end of the day, it was doomed to fail, and it failed miserably. We were in a really rough spot, which I think he'll mention or he'll talk about. Like, damn, yeah. How long is this video? I think it's long. It's 36 minutes. But
Mexican goods
it's long.
didn't have to meet global standards to achieve domestic success. The PRI would have a very hands-on approach with domestic industries, making Mexico a mixed, corporatist economy. Big government and big business were deeply intertwined. Mexican companies could easily accept both private and government investment. Of course, government investment came with strings attached. Some of these conditions were for the benefit of the people. Other conditions reeked of corruption. Mexico would even go as far as to restrict the export of their oil, better to keep energy prices low for domestic consumption. The isolated and mixed economy actually worked very well for Mexico. The nation would enjoy decades of impressive growth. Economists around the world were starting to dub Mexico's growth as the Mexican miracle. Little did the world know that Mexico was on the path to disaster, all due to a geopolitical crisis far, far away from North America. The world as we know it forever changed on the 6th of October, 1973. The epicenter of this dynamic change occurred over 10,000 kilometers away from Mexico. In the
Israel?
re-established nation of Israel, citizens were celebrating the Yom Kippur holiday, and they were suddenly attacked by Egypt and Syria. This military conflict didn't even last for 3 weeks, but its consequences are still with us today. While Israel won the conflict, the Arab and Persian world weren't too happy with the outcome, frustrated with the quick loss. These nations
This stuff,
decided
yeah,
to deploy
exactly.
a full-on oil
Yeah.
embargo.
It's this stuff. I was thinking the exact same thought. I was like, oh my God, is this stuff really? But yeah, basically the oil protest of the Gulf states, right? Where everyone got scared about the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates and whatnot because they were restricting their oil, right? Iran to all of them. So we'll see the
On
consequences.
Israel's closest allies. The main targets of the embargo included the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Japan, and the Netherlands. To prevent middlemen from bypassing the embargo, the OPEC nations also reduced oil production. Regardless of a nation's stance on the Israeli-Arab conflict, the entire world would feel the pain of OPEC's wrath.
The oil-producing countries of the Arab world
is
decided
very
to use
salty,
their oil
yeah.
as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories.
In the end, the OPEC nations would cut oil production by 25%. When news of OPEC's moves became public, the price of oil skyrocketed. Mexico had little to worry about during this upheaval. One of the perks of having an isolated economy is protection from geopolitical chaos. This was especially true for Mexico, given that they had plenty of domestic oil. As Pemex wasn't exporting oil at this time, Mexico was shielded from skyrocketing oil prices. But with global oil prices so high, it sure would be nice if Mexico could cash in on the situation. In a short manner of time, Mexico couldn't resist the temptation and got back in the oil export game. And since prices were so incredibly high, why not go all in on oil? To truly bolster oil exports, Mexico took on quite a bit of foreign debt to expand oil production. The oil embargo wouldn't even last a full year, but it didn't matter. The era of cheap oil would never return. OPEC made it clear that they are a legitimate cartel not to be messed with. They had no
Yeah,
problem
face
manipulating
palm,
the price
Jesus
of oil for
Christ.
economic gains and geopolitical pressure. This was all very good news for Mexico, and the timing couldn't have been better. Mexico had just discovered an ocean of new oil reserves, particularly the Cantarell oil fields. Mexico's known oil reserves increased by 151%.
Yeah, again,
between
so we go back to this thing about Mexico being like this huge oil producer and discovering massive oceans of oil. What he's talking about is basically because they were discovering so much oil, they went all in on it. So they basically took a lot of debt to make investments or more machines, try to discover more oil, right? They were investing into all of this infrastructure, and the earnings, they weren't using the earnings to pay the debts. They were using the earnings, well, first of all, corruption, right? They were taking some of that money for themselves, but then they were spending it on dumb shit,
1977 and 1978, and the government took on more debt to fund more extraction.
Yeah.
Pemex was making
Oil
a
is the
ton
cause
of money
of a
in the
lot
70s.
of things. Yeah,
Some of the cash windfall
It can
was
sometimes be
used
a curse.
wisely, such as a significant expansion of elementary education and increasing access to medical services.
some of the money was well spent.
Other
Yeah,
investments were not so wise. If a private company was struggling to remain financially solvent, the Mexican government would give them an injection of cash. The PRI did a lot of this. In 1975, government investment accounted for 42% of all capital investment. But why invest in a failing business when the government could just outright buy it? That's
yeah.
what the PRI did, to an alarmingly high degree. Before the oil bonanza, Mexico had 391 state-owned enterprises. That number would triple in a decade. These state-owned enterprises did not need to be profitable.
Bro, it was
They
so
could pay
bad.
all of
Yeah.
their bills with oil money. Subsidies to state-owned enterprises
So all of the money they were making was used for a lot of these dumb investments or just buying businesses, or it was not a very good use of that money, you know? And sort of, in personal finances, you sort of learn to, in times of prosperity, save. So when you are facing financial hardships, like all of us will at some point, you have some savings, right, to fall back on. So at this point, instead of being like Norway, using some of that money with some brains, right, they spent it on dumb shit. So when prices of oil fell, and I guess I am spoiling a little bit, but oil prices eventually fell, and the Mexicans went from making a lot of money to basically no money, and now they had a bunch of debt to pay, and they just couldn't.
accounted for nearly 13% of Mexico's total GDP. The Mexican economy was artificially supported with oil.
Oh, I just want to say earlier you said CPP. Yeah, I think you're right. Instead of Chinese Communist Party, CP. Party of Pakistan that no longer exists. Oh.
Oil profits. While this corporatist approach did protect failing companies and limit unemployment, it would not be sustainable. The policy of keeping dying businesses alive with oil profits was a very risky
it
endeavor.
was terrible.
If oil prices fell, Mexico would be in big trouble. Compounding the risk was Mexico's rising debts. The smart move.
Mexico didn't learn how to manage prosperity, and I think that was a huge problem. They just didn't knew how to manage so much money, so they lost it all.
Would have used oil profits to pay off the debts that were used to build up the oil industry in the first place. But the PRI behaved in a way that assumed oil prices would never go down.
Yeah.
Oil prices stayed mostly constant after the embargo ended, but they would surge again due to another conflict in the Middle East. The people of Iran decided that they very much don't like their Shah
the
and
Shah,
decided
yeah.
to chase him out of the country. As Iran is a major oil producer, prices skyrocketed again. This was very good news for Mexico. But the second oil crisis would be short-lived. The oil shortage of the 70s would lead to the oil glut of the 80s. During the 1970s, Mexico wasn't the only country that had a strong reaction to the rise of oil prices. Other oil-rich, conflict-neutral nations also ramped up their oil production to cash in.
Yeah, like Brazil or like Angola, like these places that were not in the Middle East and weren't really affected by all of the conflicts between Israel and some of the Arab countries. So all of those countries, including Mexico, started to produce a lot of oil, but because the United States and Canada and the UK were like embargoed, they started to really be careful about how they use their oil. They started being more efficient, right? The United States started like doing efficiency on cars and other equipment and other machines, tractors, right? And like all of these countries had big reforms, so they started using less oil. So in the 80s, what happened is you got a bunch of oil, but the demand for oil is going down. People are not using that much oil anymore. So prices went down hard. Not sure if this is a weird question, but did the cartel problem decrease at all after the guy nicknamed the cartel killer was being manufactured? I learned about that stuff, about the new gun that the army is using. I honestly have no idea. I honestly really don't know. Why would a gun be a game changer for war?
The 5 embargoed nations also upped their oil and energy production. The United States started drilling in Alaska, the UK in the North Sea, and the Netherlands ramped up natural gas production in the Groningen gas fields. Canada pioneered new technologies to extract oil from the tar sands of Alberta. Japan had no fossil fuel reserves.
Yeah, Japan was
so they
really
made big
screwed.
investments in nuclear energy. Increased energy production wasn't the only reaction of the embargoed nations. They also made big strides to reduce consumption. United States started mandating fuel efficiency standards for cars via the CAFE standard regulation, which remains in place to this day. The Netherlands made it illegal to drive on Sundays, which would be a major inspiration for present-day Dutch city
Oh, they used horses?
drive on Sundays, which
They used horses in Amsterdam. Look at all the crap in the ground. I don't think this is a nice way to travel around the city, you know? Just traveling around a bunch of horses, you know? I can't think of anything worse than that, actually.
would be a major inspiration for present-day Dutch city design. Canada adopted a more greedy strategy. They decided to dramatically restrict their oil exports, which only worsened the crisis for their friends. The UK, which was already dealing with high inflation prior to the oil crisis, had to make more dramatic moves. Blackouts were very common in the kingdom, which forced retailers to use portable gas lamps to stay open. Industries that were heavily reliant on oil were restricted to 3-day work weeks, freeing up oil for the rest of the country. Japan was significantly more dependent on oil imports than any of the other embargoed nations. They had to make the most dramatic changes of the group. Pretty much every industry endured some type of restriction. This included limitations of Tokyo's famous neon lights and forcing bars and restaurants to close before sundown. Japan would also change their position in the Israeli-Arab conflict and realign to become more friendly to the OPEC nations. While energy travels at the speed of light, the effects of energy policy are painfully slow.
Yep.
No matter the energy source, new extraction and development can take years, sometimes even over a decade. In the 1970s, the entire non-OPEC world was ramping up their energy production, but the yields of these investments would not be seen for several years. In the meantime, aggressive conservation policies were being implemented to curb energy demand. When the 1980s arrived, these new energy sources were coming online in mass, and oil prices began to tumble. Oil glut had arrived, and this was very bad news for Mexico. All those investments in failing businesses by the Mexican government would come back to haunt them in dramatic fashion. With falling oil prices, Mexico struggled to keep up with their foreign debt obligations.
Exactly.
To make matters worse, the United States was fighting inflation and raised their interest rates. This made it more difficult to acquire new debt. Given that Mexico had become overly reliant on oil exports, creditors became uneasy about granting new loans to Mexico. The
Yeah,
Mexican economy
exactly. So imagine that. Now you don't have any more cash flow, right? Because the oil prices are so down. You don't have as much money. So you need to acquire more debt. But now the United States raises interest, so you're going to pay more. That debt is going to be more expensive. And the more debt you acquire and the least you pay, it's getting you a bad credit score, right? So the more debt you acquire, it becomes more and more expensive because they're giving you higher and higher interests. So it's just like a big circle. You acquire debt to pay back other debt, but that debt that you acquire is now more expensive because it has higher interests. And this is what happens to a lot of countries, even a place like Argentina, right? It's just really, really tough to get out because you need money coming in. You need debt.
economy was in a perfect storm. The decline of oil prices, poor management of a mixed economy, excessive debt, and rising interest rates all led to the 1982 economic crisis of Mexico. Banco de Mexico was running out of reserves, and the nation was on the brink of default.
Oh, really? My parents remember the blackouts during this time in the United Kingdom. That's interesting, man.
Mexico had little choice but to embrace privatization and neoliberalism, albeit with a Mexican twist. Many of the unprofitable enterprises would be put on the auction block. Private buyers would take over the enterprises and would have to find a way to make them profitable or join the graveyard of failed businesses that couldn't survive Darwinistic capitalism. The revenue the government gained through privatization would be used to service debts Mexico wouldn't privatize all state-owned enterprises. They would hold on to the ones that were able to generate cash flows, specifically Pemex, telecoms, and the national lottery. The best part about a state-owned lottery is that the government can have quite a bit of influence on who the winner is. With the combination of privatization and the reduction of corporate welfare, it seemed that Mexico might get out of their economic mess with only a few scars. But then 1986 arrived, and things got even worse for Mexico. Oil prices would completely crash. Not dip, not slide, but full-on crash. Poor Mexico. So far from God, so close to...
Most of it's pretty new to me, so I'm enjoying learning about this. Yeah, I know. A lot of it is actually like kind of new to me. A lot of this I'm learning. It's super interesting.
oil. Mexico was now at the point where they were struggling to make interest payments on their debt. In order to keep providing the most basic government services, Mexico had to fire up the money printing machines. Mexico was embarking on a long and painful recession that was coupled with double-digit inflation. The Mexican economy was in a complete freefall. The 80s would be a painful time for most Mexicans and would be known as the lost decade. But the hard times would lead to radical transformations. Transformations that would not only save Mexico, but forever change the North American continent. Changes that still impact our lives today.
Yo veo un México con hambre y con sed de justicia. Un México de gente agraviada por las distorsiones que imponen a la ley.
So this guy,
Quienes deberían de servirla, de mujeres y hombres afligidos por abuso de las autoridades o por la arrogancia de las oficinas gubernamentales.
nice speech.
No.
So this guy, oh my God, the video is gonna end now. Oh, it can't end like that. Well, so this guy was a political candidate who was very promising, but he got killed, and he had a lot of new ideas, right? And he was very neoliberal and pro the West, and he was very, against corruption and stuff, even though he was from the PRI, right? So there's like a huge thing around this guy. He got killed, so we don't know to this day who really killed him. And yeah, he's just, I guess, a symbol of promise in Mexico. He's a symbol of, a young politician who wanted change. Sort of like John F. Kennedy, I think he's like the John F. Kennedy of Mexico, I mean, they have the same colors in the flags, yeah. I like how the pre-flag looks like the Italian flag, exactly.
Queremos priistas en la comodidad de la inercia, sino en el esfuerzo del cambio.
Oh, dude. Watch part 2 on Patreon? What? Don't do this to me, my man. Pike Productions. Part 2 is on Patreon. Oh, come on, brother. That sucks. But that was an amazing speech. I know, right? He was such a good, he used to give great speech. He was just overall a great politician, He gave great speeches. I don't know. He was very good. I never got to experience him. I was not born at that time. It was like the late 90s. I was born in 1999. So I wasn't alive to see all of this. But of course, you hear a lot about, your parents tell you what happened, your grandparents, and a lot of people sort of lived this. And it was a crazy moment in Mexican history. It really was. I was hoping if the part 2 of this, but it's not. There's no part 2. So that's a little sad, but I'm sure he's gonna post it maybe someday. I don't know. Well, let's watch some Hoser, you know? Oh, this one. Nice. A Tale of Two Islands. Almost 1 million views. Hoser is really growing. That makes me happy. You know, he's a really good content creator. You know, he really deserves the subs and the videos. And I think we watched him early, right? I think he had like, I don't know. I remember the first reaction I did to Hoser. He had like 60K, I don't know, or like 100K. He was like smaller channel. And now he has like 400,000. That's a lot. And his video is getting like 1 million views. So that's also pretty cool. Hoser is epic. Yeah. I think so too. Yeah, he's great, man.
In the Americas, there's a chain of islands. In that
Oh,
chain, there's
yes,
a lumpy
sir.
island called Hispaniola, the most populated in the Caribbean. And sitting on Hispaniola is not 1, not 3, but 2 separate countries. They are Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Second
One
best
side
Canadian
speaks Spanish,
YouTuber.
the other speaks Creole and French. One is mostly mixed, the other is mostly black. The cities are different, the industries are different, the music is different, the way of lives are different, and most
Exactly,
importantly,
yeah,
while the
humor-
Dominican is
humor.
the fastest growing economy in the Americas, Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Damn, not even the poorest of the continent. It's the poorest of the hemisphere on its half of the earth. So if there's only one island, why are there 2 tails? Surely it can't be from the geography, can it? Hispaniola is one island, and yes, while pretty much all the divergence comes from its history, we can give a little bit of the credit to geography. The island is full of mountains,
vids are so
plains,
good,
beaches,
yeah.
hurricanes, and more beaches. Pretty standard stuff. Most people live in the parallel valleys where the mountains are not, yet most of those people live inside of Haiti, actually having around 500,000 more people than the Dominican, making Haiti almost
wow.
twice as densely populated. And while both countries were built off of agricultural
Haiti,
plantations,
Haiti is more populated than the Dominican Republic. I am surprised. You know, the Dominican Republic is much bigger.
if we zoom in, we can see that they're probably not equal in value. While the Dominican is green, Haiti is brown. From more people on less land, less rainfall in this third of this island, east-flowing rivers, up to 80% of Haiti's energy still coming from wood, and a history that wasn't too concerned about the future of the island, its natural resources have been stripped. This means only around 2 to 30% of Haiti's land is actually forested, but around 45% of the Dominican is forested. The geography is definitely playing a role in keeping Haiti poor, but it's also likely a symptom of being poor for most of its history, creating a cycle which some might call vicious. Haiti was and still mostly is a
sugar
subsistence farming
plantations,
economy,
Jesus.
with riches directly tied to how many natural resources you can take. Haiti produces 5 times less than the
I think the history of Haiti is probably one of the saddest out there. I mean, they started good as with a noble cause, I guess, of like being a slave colony that rebelled, and it was such a promising future, right? But at the end of the day, Jesus, it's just a really tough.
Dominican, 8 times less per capita.
Yeah, I mean,
they
look at
trade
that.
nearly 10
Anyway.
times less than Domo. Almost all of what they do trade being cotton or natural resource related. Aid is scarce. The aid they do get has to deal with the rampant corruption and instability in the nation. There are constant blackouts. Food is uncertain, having to deal with rapidly shifting prices and relying on imported food with the little foreign reserves they have. When middle-aged Canadians fly to the Caribbean for the winter, let's just say they don't go to this part of the island. They'll probably be here sitting on the beach in
Yeah.
Punta Cana, but that's too much
Yeah, my
comparison
parents
for me.
went a few months ago to Punta Cana, and they loved it. They said it was amazing. So yeah, definitely the Dominican Republic has made a lot of
Mr.
positive
Beat
changes.
said he'd cover that for me. Ain't that right, Mr. Beat?
Well, yeah, of course that's right.
Hey,
the Dominican
Mr.
Republic
Beat.
and Haiti compared. The two countries that share the...
No, not in this video. Go do your own.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said I could take over your channel.
No. You must be confused. I told you you could take over my flannel with an F.
Oh, okay. But when do I get my flannel?
I sent a bottle. It'll arrive soon.
Awesome.
Be sure to check out Mr. Beat's awesome video comparing Haiti and the Dominican Republic after you're done watching this one. The first foreign tourists on the
Okay,
island were
would you look at
Columbus
that?
and his Spanish crew landing in
I
1492,
didn't watch this
and they
far.
liked it so much that they made a permanent settlement, Santo Domingo, 4 years later. The native islanders, the Taino, were not so impressed when their
Yeah, I
island
know,
was taken
right?
over, so they resisted the takeover.
I guess it's
but
an
the
interesting collaboration for sure.
Spanish had guns, horses, and weird diseases. Not much you can do against that. They set up a very typical Spanish colonial economy, importing rich Spaniards and conquistadors to oversee plantations run by native laborers. What, you thought these rich landowners would sail across the entire ocean just so they can work? In this heat? No. This kept most of the population poor, tied to their land, and working
Beat
for
the
their
Goat.
rulers not
Yeah,
to
he's
see
a really
dime
fun
or a
YouTuber.
peso of their production. But there were two reasons that made this island less successful than most of their other colonies. One, the native population on this fairly small island was, surprise, fairly small compared to other American civilizations, and if it wasn't small enough, disease, genocide, and forced labor helped to decimate the population
Yeah.
as well. It wasn't the most moral time. They either just imported African slaves or two, focused on these two areas instead, near modern-day Mexico and Peru. These were the Spanish piggy banks, where the gold, silver, food, and huge native populations were. Why come to this island where you could become a much richer man overseeing a Peruvian silver mine? As a result, they didn't spend much money investing in the island and much time governing the people. I mean, half of the island was literally used as a pirate outpost, mostly by French buccaneers in the 15 and 1600s. That's how the French got control of this part of the island. Not by colonizing it, but by docking pirates on the anarchic island. Formally getting it in a 1697 treaty calling it Saint-Domingue. The French flipped the script. If the Spanish half was decentralized and poor, the French were going to make this part overly centralized and rich. For a very small portion of the population.
for the
they
elite.
didn't use Taino labor, but
It's hilarious how the English dumped their poorest people and the religious zealots on their colonies, while the Spanish just sent. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
imported African labor to work on plantations of cotton, tobacco, but mainly sugar. The small elite owned almost everything in the colony, including most of the people. It was the richest colony in the Americas.
I still wonder at what point in history did Haiti actually had or gained more people than the Dominican Republic.
And one of the richest places on earth for this small elite, but it wasn't sustainable at all. There were no new ideas, no education, no new technology, no new industry coming from this island.
It was rich elites. Yeah, it was just like wealthy elites.
Quite literally to extract resources, and that was its only purpose. It got to the point where soil erosion forced later Haitian generations to subsistence farming because all the dirt's nutrients were used for the money crops. 2/3 of French investment by the late 1700s went to Saint-Domingue, selling these crops back to Europe. It was like growing literal cash crops and money trees, as long as you were fine with running one of the worst slave machines on earth. It was awful, back-breaking, deadly, and many...
But that's why it worked so well. The British colonies weren't overly dependent on the slave economies overseen by landowners. Yeah, at least the settler colonies. So you're talking about Australia, you're talking about USA, you're talking about Canada, who were settled by the English. Those colonies are doing really well. When you look at Kenya or even like India, those places are not doing so well, at least per capita. But you could say a place like Kenya or India works better than a place like Pakistan or like Ethiopia, right? So I guess even in that sense, it works a little better.
Slaves escaped to the mountains to fight as Maroons. And then the whole glorious liberation of the French people from the tyranny of the king happened during the French Revolution, promising all would have liberty, fraternity, and equality. Ironic, huh? But wait, there are at least 500,000 slaves and only around 32,000 Europeans in Saint-Domingue. That's, over 15 slaves for every Frenchman. What if we just had our own glorious, bloody, liberating, deathly revolution, just like the French did? And so they did, defeating the French army in 1803 and declaring the Republic of Haiti independent in 1804 as the only nation on earth created by slaves. From the very start, Haiti was kind of screwed. Sure, they were liberated and their rulers were dead now, but the country was destroyed. Pretty much the only mode of production they had, the plantations, were destroyed from the war. Relations with Europe were tenser than those Wild West towns only big enough for one person, including with the other part of the island, losing almost all their trade and foreign investment, and they were forced to pay reparations to France in order to be recognized. As much as 50% of government revenue at times, around $30 billion in total in today's money, went to pay the French reparations during the 1800s up until 1947. Haitian leaders have been...
Holy wow. Imagine just spending half your money on paying France until 1947. That's like kind of recent. I don't know. I guess France would eventually do worse things like in Algeria and stuff, but even at the time, it still sounds weird.
Forced to stop social services like education, healthcare, and...
Yeah, for the country you defeated that, you kicked out of your island.
General infrastructure just to pay this ridiculously large debt. But before you say, golly gee, that's a lot of debt. It is, but you also might want to consider the alternative. Holy moly, that's barely any revenue. The majority of free Haitians went onto the land to farm at the subsistence level. Who owned this land? They didn't even know. After independence, there were revolts, uprisings, and even a civil war between two wannabe kings, eventually forcing many former slaves back onto plantations when order was restored. Haiti became a poor land of warlords which fought throughout the century. One of these fights was an occupation of Spanish Santo Domingo for 22 years in an attempt to free their slaves, leading to their war for independence and achieving it in 1844, becoming the Dominican Republic. Like Haiti, our friend Mr.
Dominican Republic
was
just
poor
became
and
the
a little
Dominican
restless,
Republic,
leading
right?
to in-and-out dictatorships and democracy, even being a Spanish colony briefly again. But finally, in the 1870s, they started a new strategy: get the massive American market hooked on your product. What is it? Well, it's white, it's a powder, it's very addictive, you can make Coca-Cola with it. Many tropical Latin American countries make it, oftentimes having their political system overrun by the producers of it. That's right, it's sugar. The Dominicans started to export cacao, coffee, but mainly sugar to the USA. But it's a two-way street. You can't just be a small American nation the US now depends on and expect them not to use the Monroe Doctrine on you. At least that's what the Americans thought. So after the Americans won the Spanish-American War in 1898, they started to meddle a whole lot more in the Caribbean. Sugar companies started to dominate the Dominican financial sector and government. Europeans were left in the dust to sell this new booming sugar-friendly market, while the US got more involved in their government, paying for services like infrastructure, education, and even Dominican debt. They got directly involved in 1916 when they physically took over the island just in case the Germans tried something fishy with their new canal during World War I, not letting go until 1924, much after the war ended, with some administrators sticking around until even 1932. Meanwhile, they also occupied Haiti from 1915 to 1934 for the same German suspicions. The Haitian side was not nearly as prosperous under the US, with over 15,000 people killed during the regime.
So the US took the entire island. The island. I guess I knew, but I didn't knew they took the entire island. Why I keep saying Ireland? Island. Jesus Christ. Hey, Danny. Hey. Apparently, people of English ancestry in North America are around 25 million and nearly 9 million in Australia. Yeah. That's quite a lot considering England's population is like what? 40 million or 45 million?
Oppression, forced labor, and even segregation imposed in some places. So when it was time for real independence, Haiti was in even more poverty, violence, and incredible corruption by gangs and warlords, whereas the Dominican was just the usual type of poor and unequal found in most post-Spanish nations.
Yeah.
But the Great Depression hit the Dominican
Sadly.
hard, having built their economy on the idea of endless American demand for a seemingly endless American diet. Depression turned into revolution, and soon the caudillo of all caudillos took charge, Rafael Trujillo. He ruled for 31 years, and this guy had an iron fist. Under him, the Dominican turned into a
Yeah, because that's the UK as a whole has like 70 million, but like English people, I think it's like 45, right?
dictatorship.
Yeah,
There were
yeah.
massacres,
45.
political opponents were killed, censorships, conformity to him, and
General
theft.
Trujillo,
Theft
yeah.
of what? Well, pretty much everything. Trujillo loved the free market. That is, a market he is free to rule, owning much of the Dominicans' land, resources, factories.
That's the thing about a lot of these right-wing dictatorships in Latin America. It's not that they were necessarily free market. They were just wanted the market for themselves, you know?
And industries. It's estimated that he potentially owned up to 60% of the country's GDP. Talk about a monopoly.
Jesus.
Well, for all the thousands of people who died under Trujillo's rule, at least it was somewhat stable, attracting foreign development to the country and having the government invest heavily to build a new nation with new industry. You know, since the guy in charge had so much personally invested in it. Well, whatever, the US kept him around since he kept pumping out and expanding that sweet, sweet sugar production. Plus, they feared the entire nation falling apart if he was killed, which might have been exactly what happened. See, Trujillo really hated the Venezuelan president Romulo Betancourt, even attempting to get him assassinated in 1960. That's kind of awkward for the US. Can't have your sugar supplier trying to kill the head of your oil supplier, so they cut ties with Trujillo and imposed sanctions on the nation. Not really surprising that 1 year later, Trujillo was assassinated himself. This broke a centralized system and civil war broke out in 1965, followed by US occupation until 1966. And finally, the Dominican really started to grow, which we'll talk about in the section on their economy. Haiti also had their own dictator, actually two of them. Francois Duvalier took power in 1957, but you might know him better as Papa Doc. There are three things Papa Doc loved most: violence, power, and voodoo, usually combining all three. Like Trujillo's regime, Haiti became a military dictatorship run by his Tonton Macoute, aka the Boogeymen, silencing political opposition, rigging elections, cutting ties with pretty much everyone diplomatically except Ethiopia, killing up to 60,000 citizens during his
Weird
reign,
choice,
with many
man.
more fleeing the nation, and practically praising himself as a god among men chosen to lead Haiti to glory. If that glory means stealing government funds, taking Haitian-owned businesses for yourself, and stealing foreign aid, then yeah, I guess he was chosen to rule Haiti. Members of his boogeymen were often not even given an official salary, forcing them to loot and extort citizens to make a living for themselves. Papa Doc was very much like the French elite of colonial Haiti. Extraction by the elites for the simple purpose of enriching themselves with no plan of developing Haiti further. When he died in 1971, his son Jean-Claude Duvalier, aka Baby Doc, took rule. Haitians really like their nicknames, huh? Baby Doc's rule was more or less the same as his papa's, just a little less strict. But still, no questioning him, and the country is made for him to get rich. The rulers failed to maintain public services and infrastructure, sinking Haiti more into poverty. But unlike Papa Doc, Baby Doc was just a little bebe. He was only 19 years old when he took power. We can beat him, said the people, so the 1980s were a time of protests, unrest, and riots. Did they get what they wanted? A rich and free Haiti? No, but Baby Doc fled to France in 1986, leaving Haiti in freefall. He actually returned in 2011 and was charged with corruption and embezzlement, so I guess it has a nice ending. So while the Duvaliers
So he actually
failed
like
to develop
went to
Haiti,
jail.
Trujillo developed the Dominican Republic, but as his own private business, both stealing from their people. Which one ended up better? The Dominican did, by a long shot, but that's not to say it's a rich nation nowadays. In the 80s, it was among the poorest nations in the Americas, and nowadays it's comparable to a middle-income nation like Mexico. Driving this growth was a switch in strategy from sugar to spice, spice meaning industry and tourism. They set up industrial free zones for manufacturing, tax-free ports for exporting the newly made goods, and diversified more into mining, construction, electronics, and still a lot of farming. However, from a past full of monopoly abuses, Dominican small firms remain fairly uninnovative and rather inefficient today.
Imagine being a 19-year-old dictator. Yeah, it must really screw with your head. I mean, I can't imagine someone that young having that much power. I don't think it's healthy. I mean, I think you would develop some sort of I don't know.
In fact, only 3 firms make up around 96% of the sugar produced in the country. Still, this growth has made this half of the island increasingly middle class and urban, summed up by the greatest Dominican invention of all time, the speaker van.
Yeah.
Tourism exploded at the same time too. 1984 was the first year when tourism revenue brought in more money than sugar did, yet to be fair, sugar prices were some of the lowest they've ever been at the time. The Dominican is the biggest tourist destination in the Caribbean. When it's between them, a failed state, a highly restrictive state, or tiny islands with not nearly as many resources available to build resorts, it's no wonder they attract
Well,
tourists.
you still have the Bahamas, you know, that's a pretty big destination. But all right, I mean,
So well. Tourism is their new cash crop. Sell mojitos on the beach instead of
yeah,
the sugar
exactly.
used
Look at how old Napoleon was when he was rising to power. Yeah, he
to
was
make
pretty
that
young.
mojito. Tourism accounts now for over 25% of their GDP, whereas sugar fell to less than 1% of their total exports. Yet tourism also uses over 40% of their energy, and tourists generate 40% of the nation's waste.
Wow.
Hey, maybe they sold out their part of the island, but it might be worth it for that 6% growth rate since 2010, the highest in the Americas today. Haiti did not have that option. Today, it is much, much poorer, much more violent, more unstable, has nearly a 10-year lower life expectancy, and is just not a great vacation spot. Over 80% of the population is in poverty, and just to say it one more time, much of the population relies on subsistence agriculture for food security. Decentralized gangs fight for business in the country, with around 40% of Port-au-Prince controlled by them. Leadership changes quickly
Yeah,
as
Chad, you know, Haiti is just tough, man. It's just one of the worst. I can't imagine many places that are worse than Haiti. I mean, maybe North Korea, maybe like some of the poor African states like Burundi or Rwanda, right? The Congo, maybe. But outside of that, I mean, maybe Afghanistan, I guess, but it's not many. It's not many places that are worse than
presidents
Haiti.
and politicians are killed, and they fight against nature in terms of soil erosion, floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes, with the
Yeah.
worst ever being in 2010. Almost 250,000 died, 1.3 million people were displaced, and 70% of the nation's crops were destroyed. With rampant corruption in foreign aid and a tiny pot of actual wealth, Haiti can't afford the proper training or infrastructure to make mass earthquake-proof buildings. So in 2021, another earthquake destroyed almost 150,000 buildings,
Jesus
2,000
Christ.
lives, and 11% of GDP from the previous year. Haiti now essentially relies on the USA for aid, but much of it is inefficient, often going to the politicians' pockets instead of the people's, for trade, with 80% of their exports going to the States, and for the future, with Haitians increasingly running away as fast as they can to the US, with immigrants tripling from 1990 to 2018. The nation's debts, decentralization, borderline fearful trade policies, and foreign interventions kept it poor. But in good news, they're planting thousands of trees. Hopefully that can fix all their problems. Now go check out Mr. Beat's video. Go!
Wow, that was really fun, dude. Hoser really knows how to make a good video. Okay, guys, so I'm gonna have to leave actually, but I think tomorrow Geography Now releases the video in the UK. So if that's the case, like, you guys will probably see me tomorrow. But can we like check? Has he posted about? Thank you. You too. Have a nice day. So I don't know if he releases the episode for the UK tomorrow. I'm definitely gonna be streaming that for sure, and you know it's gonna be a long video, so that's definitely gonna take some time. So I'm excited for that. I follow him a lot. Yeah, he's really good. He does have a lot of like really good videos. And the UK video, it's probably gonna come tomorrow. I don't think I watch the episode on the Emirates. Maybe we can watch that if that's interesting to you guys. I mean, I'm gonna go to the Emirates, so maybe I should know this. And I'm going to visit. I'm not going to live in the Emirates yet. I'm just going to visit. But anyways, I guess I'll see you tomorrow. And see you guys. Peace.